The film begins with a man named Phil Miller traveling around the entire United States in his bus, hoping to find someone to accompany him in life. However, all of Phil's efforts are in vain, as he finds no signs of anyone's existence after almost traversing all the states. Frustrated, Phil eventually makes a sign on a roadside billboard indicating that someone is still alive in Tucson. He then begins to do as he pleases in the world, starting by stealing a luxurious house and furnishing it with items he stole from various places, creating his dream home. At night, Phil prays and talks to God, hoping for guidance on finding survivors of the pandemic that has struck the earth. He also thanks God for giving him a new luxurious home that he never had before. The next day, Phil plays tennis alone and goes to the supermarket to find food, breaking the supermarket's glass and taking whatever he wants. On his way home, he accidentally sees a mannequin resembling a woman, which piques his interest. However, he decides to go home momentarily and enjoy the wine he just acquired. The following day, Phil starts looking for new activities, playing a bowling game using a fish tank as a bowling alley. He even deliberately wrecks cars he finds in a parking lot out of boredom. Time passes, and Phil reminisces on June 18th, his birthday, recalling the times when he could celebrate with friends. But now, he celebrates his birthday alone as the only person left alive on Earth. The next day, Phil begins to lose control of his activities, consuming several bottles of alcohol he piles up as trash, and even using alcohol as a pool to soak in. When he goes to a bar, Phil creates his own friends, drawing faces on objects like tennis balls and golf balls, naming them Kevin, Anton, Trevor, etc. At the bar, Phil tells his new bar friend that he longs to meet a living woman in the world. As he talks about women, Phil suddenly remembers a mannequin dressed like a woman he saw in a store. Phil immediately goes to the mannequin and starts talking to her, expressing his interest. He even introduces himself to the mannequin, but when Phil holds her hand, it breaks off, adding to his frustration. The next day, Phil's hope starts to wane, and he prepares to end his life by crashing into a large rock. After preparing everything, Phil bids farewell to his imaginary friends, apologizing for having to end his own life. He then drinks beer for the last time and speeds his car recklessly. However, while driving, Phil suddenly sees signs of someone still alive. He quickly stops his car and looks into the distance, where he sees smoke believed to be created by humans. Finally, Phil rushes towards the smoke and finds some women's clothes. As he finds the clothes, Phil faints and dreams of a beautiful woman trying to wake him up. But when Phil wakes up, it's not a beautiful woman trying to wake him. Phil is startled and avoids the woman. However, he is lucky to have found another human still alive on Earth besides himself. Seeing Phil scream, the woman immediately pulls out a gun and points it at Phil, telling him to drop his clothes. Feeling threatened, Phil tries to calm the woman down. Thanks to some of Phil's words, the woman agrees to lower her gun, and they start to introduce themselves. Phil introduces himself as the last man on Earth, while the woman, Carol Polbasian, introduces herself as the last woman on Earth. After getting acquainted, Phil and Carol quickly tried to blend in and tell each other about their lives. Phil explained that he was a 41-year-old man working as a contract employee in a company. Meanwhile, Carol was a girl who worked as a manager in a hot sauce processing company. Finally, they toasted to their first meeting, and after that, Phil invited Carol to his residence. Phil showcased some antique items he believed were worth billions of dollars. However, Carol found it hard to believe because she was convinced Phil stole them from elsewhere. After introducing various parts of his house, Phil seemed uncomfortable with Carol's presence because she kept commenting on his house. Eventually, Phil escorted Carol back to her campsite. But the next morning, Phil suddenly woke up and saw Carol tidying up the trash he had piled up. Seeing Carol made Phil surprised, and he immediately told Carol to stop picking up his trash. Then Carol followed Phil's request, and she immediately invited Phil to go to a supermarket. Finally, Phil took Carol to the supermarket, but an annoying incident happened again. Carol kept insisting that Phil obey the rules, such as parking the car properly and not consuming parking spaces for the disabled. Irritated because Carol kept talking, Phil quickly drove his car, crashing into the store door until it broke. Eventually, he parked his car inside the store. After finishing his business, Phil took Carol back to her campsite. While he went to the bar to talk to his imaginary friend about a woman named Carol he had just met, he told his friend that Carol was the first annoying woman he had met. When Phil returned home, he saw Carol becoming more daring. Carol decided to move to the next room to be closer and to keep in touch with each other. Carol said that the future of human civilization depends on their actions to regenerate the human population. Hearing Carol's rambling made Phil very tired, so he finally allowed Carol to stay in the next room. While Phil was enjoying the pool he had turned into a toilet, Carol suddenly approached him. She said she needed water access to bathe, water her garden, and plant a tomato for their future children. Hearing those words made Phil very disgusted because he believed they would never have children together. But Carol immediately showed him a tomato she slowly ate to tempt Phil. However, Phil ignored it and didn't care that Carol was eating a fresh tomato. But that changed at night because suddenly Phil went to Carol's garden and immediately ate some tomatoes Carol had planted. The next day, Carol visited Phil's residence and accused him of stealing some of her tomatoes. Phil replied that he didn't understand what Carol was talking about, but clear evidence was attached to Phil's beard because there were some traces of tomatoes sticking to it. But Carol wasn't angry with him, and she immediately left Carol. Feeling sorry after seeing Carol's struggle and effort to find water access to plant her garden, Phil began to be moved, and he decided to help Carol find water. After successfully obtaining and finding water access, Phil quickly connected one pipe to another to interconnect and flow the water to Carol's garden. After Phil's hard work, the pipeline finally conveyed the water. And the next day, Carol's garden was decorated with fresh water watering Carol's small tomatoes. After seeing Phil repairing their relationship, seeds of love began to emerge between them. Carol invited Phil to have dinner together at her house. Phil agreed to it, and that night they immediately enjoyed intimate moments together. During dinner, Carol began to discuss their plans to regenerate humans by inviting him to have children together. Phil welcomed it with enthusiasm, but when Carol said she wouldn't have children before marriage, Phil suddenly changed his mind and strongly refused. But when Phil rejected it, Carol canceled their plan to increase the human population further. Finally, with no other choice, Phil agreed to Carol's plan, and they got married. Then they began to hold an official wedding party in a church, where Phil and Carol both wore their best clothes to celebrate their wedding together. But after it was over, Phil regarded their marriage as a foolish charade because they were the last two people alive on Earth. However, when Phil stepped out, he was surprised to see some people cheering for their wedding and congratulating them. But it turned out to be just Phil's dream, which he considered a nightmare. Because in reality, Carol suddenly approached Phil to arrange dinner again to celebrate their upcoming wedding the next day. Carol was seen preparing some luxurious food she created herself. While they enjoyed their dinner together, Carol suddenly pulled out two walkie-talkies. She gave one to Phil and held the other so they could communicate even at a distance. Before the party started the next day, each of them held a bachelor party. Carol went to the supermarket to make something. But unlike Phil, who spent his bachelorhood burning some items, he even made popcorn by burning them and doing strange things that Carol had never seen before. In his final moments of bachelorhood, Phil approached the mannequin woman one last time. He said that even though he would marry a real woman in the world, that mannequin would be the special woman in his life. Finally, the wedding began. Phil went to church in his casual attire, while Carol looked beautiful and prepared everything to look like a real wedding. Using a recorder, Phil and Carol officially became husband and wife who would continue the human population on Earth. When the moment came for Phil to give Carol the ring, everything suddenly went chaotic when it turned out Phil didn't bring the ring for her. Feeling that Phil wasn't serious about the wedding, Carol eventually left Phil with sadness. Conversely, Phil felt guilty to Carol for not preparing their wedding well. Finally, he visited Carol's residence, and when he entered, he saw that the house had been decorated by Carol to liven up their wedding party. It even seemed that Carol made a wedding cake made from meatball ingredients. At night, Phil asked Carol's whereabouts using their walkie-talkie. Carol replied that she couldn't be disturbed because she was busy, but Phil managed to find her, and there he began to regret his actions. He apologized to Carol and promised to be a good husband in the future. Hearing the romantic words Phil uttered made Carol touched. She finally agreed to reconcile with Phil. To redeem his mistake, before they went home together, Phil first took Carol to a jewelry store to choose the ring she liked. Of course, by breaking in. After getting the ring and choosing it, they both started planning to have children who would later be their successors. The first day as Phil's wife seemed to be the hardest day Carol had ever gone through because she had to follow what Phil did. Starting from playing tennis, then burning Phil who wore fire-resistant clothes. But a unique event happened in this episode, where Phil finally introduced the mannequin woman he saw in a supermarket to Carol. Seeing the mannequin, at first, Carol was very happy and introduced herself as Phil Miller's new wife. But after introducing herself, she suddenly damaged the mannequin and destroyed it. After that, they decided to go back to their residence. On the way, while Phil was chatting with Carol, he suddenly didn't see the surroundings and instead hit a moving car. Seeing they had hit a car, Phil immediately got out to check the condition of the person driving the car. When the driver of the car got out, Phil was truly surprised because the driver he hit was a very beautiful woman. After learning that there was another woman alive on Earth, Phil's attention immediately shifted to that beautiful woman. When Carol was being saved by her because Phil's car was about to explode, he instead immediately entered the woman's car. Finally, the three of them started driving to Phil's residence. As the car was moving, Phil kept staring at the woman's face. Meanwhile, his wife, Carol, was in the back seat trying to explain to the woman they just met that they were a married couple. Upon hearing Carol explain her status, Phil quickly rolled down Carol's car window, constantly talking about his status. And this is where Phil's fuckboy spirit emerged when they arrived at Phil's residence. He immediately showed off some luxurious items to the woman who introduced herself as Melissa. However, Phil's efforts failed when Carol said that Phil stole all those items. Then Carol and Phil told Melissa to find her own house nearby. And in the evening, she was invited to have dinner together. When Carol invited her to dinner, Melissa was deeply moved and couldn't believe that she would finally find another human. Then they hugged each other. Without any shame, Phil also hugged Melissa. That evening, Carol also invited Melissa to cook together. Carol asked Melissa to taste her own cooking. When Melissa tasted Carol's cooking, her facial expression indicated that Carol's dish wasn't good, but she wanted to appreciate Carol by saying that Carol's dish was very delicious. Then Carol asked Phil to come down because the food was ready and they would soon have dinner. When Phil came down from his room, they were both really surprised, because Phil suddenly shaved his hair and beard, making him look very different. During dinner, Phil started flirting with Melissa without seeing Carol as his wife, where he asked about Melissa's past life. Melissa said she had been married to a jerk named Greg who ended up cheating with the police. Hearing that Melissa was single made Phil even more tempted and tried continuously to approach her. But because Melissa knew that Phil was married to Carol, she chose to talk about Carol and Phil's marriage. Here Phil's feelings began to change towards Carol, because when dinner was over and Melissa went home, Carol invited Phil to resume their relationship so that they could quickly have children. But Phil refused the invitation with the excuse that he was experiencing diarrhea. Finally, Phil decided to sleep alone. When he was asleep, he suddenly woke up by the sound of Melissa inviting him downstairs. But once again, it was a trick. Because when Phil went to her, it was actually Carol who made Phil scream hysterically. The next day, Melissa returned to Carol and Phil's residence, where Phil continues to seek Melissa's attention, where he suddenly became a bodybuilder by lifting a barbell to shape his chest muscles. After finishing his exercise, he then asked Melissa about the purpose and intention of her visit. Melissa replied that she was just surprised by a Volkswagen car that suddenly appeared at her house. Seeing the car, Phil pretended that he wasn't the one who gave her the car, suspecting that it was a gift from a fairy. Then suddenly Carol came and yelled at Phil. Carol started getting jealous of Phil's excessive behavior towards Melissa, where she bought Melissa a car, while the broken door of her house was never fixed. Finally, because he didn't want Carol to get angry, Phil promised to fix it. Then Carol and Melissa began to tell stories, where Carol showed the wedding book between her and Phil, which Carol painted herself. Carol also told about her good intentions with Phil to regenerate the human population, but she didn't want to do that without getting married, so she finally married Phil. Hearing Carol's story made Melissa emotional because she saw Phil and Carol very happy. In the afternoon, when Phil was fixing Carol's house door, Melissa suddenly came to invite him and Carol to drink a cold beer that she had prepared at her house. Phil gladly accepted the offer and promised to bring Carol along. But in reality, Phil didn't take Carol with him, citing that Carol was experiencing diarrhea and couldn't come with him. Finally, Phil took advantage of the situation to continue flirting with Melissa. And Phil's opportunity grew when Melissa began to talk about missing the touch of a man. Phil said he was ready to serve Melissa if she ever needed a man's touch, but Melissa refused because Phil was married to Carol. Finally, Phil went to Carol to discuss their separation, but it changed when Phil saw Carol making a bouquet of flowers that she dedicated to Phil. Seeing Carol's effort made Phil change his mind, and he didn't go through with divorcing Carol. He only said he had diarrhea. At night, the three of them decided to have a camping session, where Carol showed her affection for Phil in front of Melissa. Seeing Carol's behavior made Phil feel like his chances of flirting with Melissa were diminishing. When Carol was getting drinks, Phil brought up Melissa's longing for a man's touch. But Melissa said that her words weren't truly sincere because she was drunk at the time. But Phil kept pressing Melissa, and Melissa emphasized that she didn't want to ruin her friendship with Carol. Finally, Carol came back and poured drinks. After they had one glass, Carol suddenly said that she was excited and immediately grabbed Phil's hand. You know the rest. The next day, Phil returned to Melissa's house to continue trying to flirt with her. Phil dressed very neatly to catch Melissa's attention, but Phil's efforts truly failed because Melissa didn't want to be involved with a married man. Finally, Phil returned home and cried to Carol. Carol, seeing her husband distressed, tried to calm him down and asked what had happened. Phil said he had to be involved with Melissa instead if he didn't want his children to be involved with each other. He did this while trying to get Carol's attention to allow him. Hearing Phil ask for permission like that, Carol immediately got angry and told Phil to leave, calling him a stinky skunk. After that incident, Phil was suddenly approached by Melissa asking about what Phil had said to Carol, which caused Carol to come to her and say that Melissa had stolen her husband. Hearing that, Phil said he knew nothing about it. Melissa explained that she had tried to find other humans to get along with, but this time she had to accept the hatred of her female friends because of Phil's behavior. Feeling guilty, Phil invited Melissa to fix everything by inviting her to lunch. But that was clearly rejected by Melissa, who immediately left Phil. Phil thought hard to fix the situation. He finally had an idea to get forgiveness from the women around him. Then Phil held a makeshift night market that he built to attract Carol and Melissa's attention. Phil even wanted to embarrass himself so that Carol would forgive him. Using a loudspeaker, Phil continuously tried to flirt with Carol and Melissa, who were reading books together at Carol's residence. Feeling disturbed, they both finally decided to approach Phil. Seeing Melissa and Carol come, Phil immediately apologized to both of them. Phil's apology was accepted and Carol then invited Phil to talk for a while. In front of both of them, Phil tensely tried to listen to Carol's words. Then Carol explained that she had talked a lot with Melissa in the final decision. For the survival of humanity, Carol allowed Phil to be involved with Melissa, with the condition only 3 times in 1 month. Initially, Phil refused because for him, it wasn't enough, but he tried to accept it first. Then Carol explained again that Melissa was pregnant, so Phil was not allowed to touch her at all. Phil agreed very much with that, and he was very grateful to both of them. Then he said goodbye and went home. On the way, Phil was so happy that he finally got the opportunity he had always dreamed of. The next day, Carol came to Phil because it was the day when Phil had to be involved with Melissa. With enthusiasm and neatly dressed, Phil happily accepted the offer. Then he met Melissa and took her to a park, where Phil had prepared the atmosphere as best as possible so that Melissa felt safe and comfortable being near him. Seeing Phil's effort, Melissa was flattered and she wanted to do it quickly. But Phil held her back because he still had a surprise. Then he lit the guitar and started playing it, where at the same time fireworks appeared and went straight up to the sky. But it seemed that wasn't the right move for Phil. Because of the explosion of the fireworks, a sports car immediately approached the source of the explosion. And when Phil was really going to be involved with Melissa, the sports car arrived at the right time to disrupt the moment between the two of them. At first, Phil thought it was Carol's doing, but the owner of the sports car came out and turned out to be a man. Then he introduced himself as Todd. After the arrival of another man named Todd, Melissa immediately shifted her attention to Todd. Melissa appeared to be very caring for Todd as he told the story of his life after traveling around America alone. Todd recounted how he almost went to Mexico if he hadn't seen the fireworks that Phil lit, and he was very thankful for that. Finally, the party was held with the 4 of them, where Carol was with Phil, and Todd accompanied Melissa. At that night's session, Todd told the story of his life after Phil asked about Todd's weight. Todd happily replied that he weighed 258 kilograms, and that's what caused him to be bullied a lot during high school, where he was once made the king of alumni by his friends. It made Todd very proud of himself. But all that changed when he found out he was actually compared to a pig that was made into a queen. Hearing that story, everyone was very sad to hear about the bullying Todd had experienced. However, Melissa defended Todd by saying that now all of Todd's high school friends were dead. After Todd finished his story, Phil brought up Melissa again about the relationship he would have. But Melissa refused because she had found another man. And that made Phil, who initially seemed like a fuckboy, now turned into a sad boy. As the night grew later, Todd decided to rest and left them. followed by Melissa, who left to rest, making Phil even more tortured because he failed to have a relationship with her. The next day, Carol had the idea of throwing a party where she would unite Todd with Melissa. Soon after, Phil came suddenly and immediately saw the invitation card. When he saw the invitation card, Phil's face suddenly changed, but he couldn't refuse it, and finally the invitation was spread to Todd and Melissa. But Phil's efforts didn't stop there, because immediately he went to Melissa's residence and again discussed one of Melissa's favorite movies. That is Shawshank Redemption, where he could even quote a few lines from one of the actors there until complete, which made Melissa quite impressed with that. But all of Phil's efforts were shattered when it turned out Phil had prepared it on a piece of paper that he kept on Melissa's door. And it turned out Melissa knew about it, and she was very sure if Phil had never watched the movie. Then Melissa slammed the door, indicating that she was no longer interested in Phil. Then the scene shifts when Todd and Melissa arrive after receiving a vacation invitation card from Carol. After the two of them arrived and gathered, Carol started her idea, where she pretended to be nauseous and vomiting, which turned out to be Carol's drama. After she finished with her affairs, Carol suddenly told Todd and Melissa to go on vacation without her, because she would be fine with Phil taking care of her. Not long after, Phil arrived, who initially disagreed with letting Todd and Melissa go on vacation together. Finally, reluctantly had to allow Todd and Melissa to vacation together for the sake of Carol's idea. Then Todd and Melissa went to a golf course, where they played a game of golf and interacted very well. In the distance, Phil apparently monitored their movements, and he showed a very jealous expression when Melissa and Todd held hands. The next day, they entertained themselves again by playing tennis, where before they played tennis, Phil had the idea of opening his shirt for men, to distinguish between the men's and women's teams. Melissa said the net was enough for them to distinguish between the women's and men's teams. But Todd didn't mind, and he opened his shirt. When Todd opened his shirt, Melissa immediately noticed the stitches on Todd's body. Finally, Todd told if he donated his kidney to an orphanage. Hearing Todd tell his story again made Phil disgusted. He decided to play tennis alone when Melissa and Carol were listening to Todd's story. When Phil was picking up his ball in a place, he suddenly saw Melissa and Todd being affectionate, which made Phil even more jealous. Not long after, Carol came and said Todd was the right partner for Melissa. That night, Phil came to Melissa to ask for an explanation about Todd. Instead of asking for an explanation, Phil insulted Todd by saying he had some friends with big body posture, and they deserved to be teased for the rest of their lives. Hearing Phil insult Todd made Melissa very angry. She slammed the door hard and kicked Phil out. Phil, who regretted it, finally apologized to Melissa and said that Todd was a very good man. Then he told if he had been traveling for 2 years just to find a woman like Melissa. After hearing Phil's story, Melissa finally opened the door, and finally Phil took Melissa to where he kept his imaginary friends in the form of balls. There he introduced Kevin, Gray, etc. to Melissa. Then he explained if he had never watched Shawshank Redemption, because his favorite movie is The Godfather. He also explained his feelings for Melissa, where when he first saw her, Phil immediately fell in love and felt like he wanted to keep staring into Melissa's eyes. And Phil hopes Melissa feels the same way about him. But Melissa's answer is no. After hearing Melissa's answer, Phil suddenly changed the topic and said if he would say that to Carol. The scene begins with Phil being pressured by Carol to immediately clean his pool toilet because, according to Carol, it has been bothering her. Carol even covered her nose with a tissue so she wouldn't smell the stench from Phil's pool toilet. But it seems that Phil never cared because he never wanted Carol to stay with him. He preferred to complain about Melissa, who always played a song every night, where Carol actually liked the song because it signaled Melissa was happy with Todd. Hearing that, Phil immediately became curious about what Todd was doing with Melissa. Finally, he went to Todd's residence and began to act familiar with him. He asked about the song Melissa sang. Todd answered that he had heard it a few times. But Todd made a mistake when he mentioned being with Melissa. Because he accidentally slipped, Phil pressed Todd to tell him. Initially, Todd refused, but Phil continued to press him until Todd explained about him and Melissa eventually having a relationship. Just as Todd uttered a word, Phil immediately frowned, indicating he was very angry and jealous because Todd could immediately have a relationship with Melissa even though they had just met. Todd continued his story if it felt like a dream to him, and the song they often sang every night would be a sign if they did it again. When Todd finished his story, Melissa suddenly approached the two of them and asked Todd to come to her house immediately because she needed help. Hearing Melissa needed help, Phil was moved and offered to help Melissa. But Melissa refused, saying she already had Todd, and that made Phil even more angry. Then he went home and jumped into the pool filled with harsh water. Then he screamed loudly. The next day, when Phil and Carol were having breakfast, Carol talked about Melissa talking about her relationship with Todd, which was clearly rejected by Phil because he didn't want to discuss it. Moreover, Melissa always disturbed him every night because she kept playing that song. Then Carol had an idea, because Phil was the president of the United States. Why didn't he make a vote to stop it? Hearing that idea, Phil immediately moved, and that night he gathered all the people to hold a vote. Where he as the president of the United States had the right to hold a democracy to determine a bright future. He then made a policy on relationship restrictions which certainly no one agreed with. Instead of profiting, Phil actually suffered when Carol chose Phil to clean his pool toilet. And sure enough, everyone agreed with that, making Phil's nights increasingly heavy and tortured. Finally, the next day, Phil used an anti-odor uniform and started cleaning his pool very reluctantly. Shortly after he cleaned the pool, Phil gave up first and instead cried by the poolside. When Phil was crying, Melissa suddenly approached Phil, asking him to talk for a moment. Finally, Phil quickly changed his clothes neatly and began to talk to Melissa, which actually discussed Phil's feelings for her, because he didn't want to be embarrassed. Phil said if it was something he would give to Carol, but apparently Melissa knew the acting Phil always showed. Melissa explained if they could just be friends like they were when they first met. But if Phil wanted to keep a relationship with her, he couldn't because now she had Todd. Initially, Phil tried to coax Melissa by imagining if Todd had never existed. But Melissa still said if Todd was here. Then she left Phil. Hearing Melissa constantly saying Todd was here made Phil's mind even wilder to get rid of Todd. Finally, he quickly went to Todd's residence and started taking him out, where he promised beautiful views in the city of Tucson. Of course, that was well received by Todd, who believed in Phil. But all that changed when in the middle of the journey, Phil told Todd to check his car's tires because he felt something was wrong had happened. Then he stopped his car and Todd immediately checked it out. When Todd was checking, Phil suddenly pressed the gas pedal and immediately sped away, leaving Todd. But just as Phil moved a few meters, he suddenly stopped his car and started yelling in confusion about what he had done to Todd. While Todd just looked at Phil, who was arguing with himself about whether to leave Todd or return to him and take him home. After struggling for quite a while, Phil finally decided to approach Todd again and apologize for what had happened. When Phil returned, Todd said he knew Phil was a good man and would come back to him. Finally, Phil truly invited Todd to see the beautiful cityscape of Tucson. At night, they decided to have another cheerful camping with a bonfire atmosphere in the midst of their conversation. Todd showed his affection to Melissa when Melissa said Todd bought her a beautiful gold bracelet. Not wanting to be outdone by Todd, Phil said he bought body lotion for Carol. But Carol didn't want Phil to appear good in front of everyone. Then Todd suddenly pulled out a masterpiece he created to commemorate their time together as four, where he made the work with clay and showed Todd, Melissa, Carol, and Phil together. They all appreciated Todd's work, except Phil, who, after Todd's work was put away, pretended not to see and immediately dropped it in front of them all. Interestingly, the work was not damaged and only broke part of Phil's, which they thought was better without Phil. The next day, Phil went to the bar to tell his imaginary friends how Todd was made a hero by Melissa and Carol about his expertise in all fields. Where he said he was always better than Todd in any way, then he thought hard about how to win Melissa's heart back. Finally, he left the bar and thought in front of his car alone. When Phil turned around, he suddenly startled by something in front of him. Phil was really surprised because in front of him there was a live cow. Finally, he brought the cow and invited all his friends to witness something they had never imagined before. Then he opened his house door, and soon a cow appeared that made all his friends stunned. But the discovery was nothing compared to Todd, who immediately had the idea to take care of the cow so he could milk it, make butter, yogurt, milkshakes, and everything made from the cow's milk. But different views came from Phil, who actually wanted to slaughter the cow to make it a steak. Hearing Phil wanting to slaughter it made everyone disagree. But Phil said he was the discoverer of the cow, and he had the right to do anything to it. Melissa opposed it, and thought if Phil looked like a 5-year-old child, because he couldn't do anything. Finally, Phil reluctantly complied with their words. Then Todd took him to a field and began to practice how he could get the cow's milk. When Todd finished taking the cow's milk, he immediately told Carol and Melissa to taste it. Seeing the gesture from Carol and Melissa saying the cow's milk was very delicious made Phil want to taste it. But out of pride, he said he had an allergy to glucose contained in the milk. Finally, they all rested. In the middle of the night, Phil suddenly brought a pot and immediately squeezed the cow's milk himself. He drank it and said the cow's milk he found was very delicious. When Phil was enjoying the cow's milk, he suddenly heard someone approaching him. He quickly hid, and it turned out to be Melissa and Todd who were squeezing the cow's milk again, where they showed their affection, which made Todd jealous again and again. Because he didn't want Todd to always look like a hero, Phil moved the cow to his bar so Todd couldn't continue to show his expertise. Then when Phil returned home, everyone seemed confused when they couldn't find the cow. Melissa suspected Phil had hidden it, but Phil said he had just arrived from the city to get a hat that he would put on their cow, because he didn't want anyone to argue. Finally, Melissa made a plan where they would spread out to find the whereabouts of the cow. And the first place they would visit was Phil's bar proposed by Melissa. She asked Phil to show the whereabouts of the place, while Todd and Carol went to another area. When Melissa approached her bar, Phil watched her movements from a distance, and luckily Melissa didn't find her cow. After Melissa left, Phil immediately approached her bar and was grateful because Melissa couldn't find her cow. But that actually made Phil panic because the cow he hid was really missing. Finally, he tried to find it. But just as Phil was about to search, he suddenly saw Todd had brought the cow and said he found it in someone else's yard. Then Todd said he would tell everyone if Phil was the one who found the cow. Hearing that, Phil felt strange about Todd. But Todd explained that he was very grateful to Phil for uniting him with the woman he greatly admired. Finally, on the night after they found the cow again, Todd processed the cow's milk into yogurt, which they enjoyed together. When the event was over and Phil was asleep, he suddenly woke up by Carol's screams. And it turned out everyone was awakened by Carol's screams. Then they approached Carol, who turned out to be approached by their cow, because she didn't want to sleep next to the cow. Carol asked permission from Phil to allow her to sleep with him. Initially, Phil refused, but because of the urging from Melissa and Todd, finally, Phil allowed Carol to sleep with him like a real husband and wife. Just before sleeping, Phil asked how the cow could enter the house. Carol told when she heard strange noises, she went out of her house. And when she came back in, she suddenly saw a cow in front of her, which turned out to be just an idea from Carol so she could sleep with Phil. Finally, they slept together, and Carol was very happy about it, while Phil felt tortured because what he wanted was for Melissa to sleep with him. On the first day, Carol moved in with Phil. In the morning, Phil was surprised to see his paintings, which Carol had redrawn to look cuter. Phil, who disagreed with that, immediately protested to Carol. Carol replied that she intentionally repainted Phil's paintings to give them a lively impression, so she painted a little dog in them. But once again, Phil insisted that Carol not meddle with his personal belongings. But Carol refused, because according to her, when she and Phil decided to be together, there would be no more Phil's or Carol's belongings, because ultimately they would own everything together, not wanting any quarrels between them. Finally, Carol asked Phil for help in buying some groceries. Finally, Phil agreed and he set off. But bitter pills had to be swallowed again by Phil because as soon as he stepped out of his house, he saw Todd cutting Melissa's hair and it looked very romantic. After seeing that incident, Phil immediately wrote on the complaint board not to cut hair in the front yard carelessly. Then he went to the supermarket. Instead of buying the groceries Carol ordered, he burned some toilet paper to relieve his boredom. He also complained to God about his life that had drastically changed after meeting Carol, Melissa, and Todd. Phil even hoped he could be alone in this world again. While Phil was lamenting his bad fate, he suddenly saw a car approaching him. And it turned out that the person driving the car was two happy women when they saw Phil. Then they introduced themselves, where the woman in black introduced herself as Gail, and the woman in red named Erica. Then Phil introduced himself as well. Then these two women asked if Phil was alone in this world. Initially, Phil hesitated to say he lived with Carol, Todd, and Melissa. But wanting to be happy, Phil finally said he was alone in this world. Finally, Gail and Erica decided to invite Phil to their luxurious home. And there they immediately held a party. They drank and were happy because Erica and Gail could finally meet other people. Then Phil began to show off his playboy side again to the two women, where he asked Gail and Erica to tell their lives. Erica said she was born in Australia and had moved around before finally meeting Gail, while Gail was a village girl who settled in the United States. Then they told how they first met. Gail told that after the virus struck, Gail began to make a wish list to do. And the first thing Gail did was go to the White House where Erica happened to be there. Then they sailed the world together to find other humans. After Gail told the story, Erica suddenly focused on the ring Phil was wearing. Phil said he was indeed married, but his wife had died a few months ago. With the drama of sadness, Phil managed to get sympathy from Gail and Erica, who immediately invited him to dinner. Hearing the invitation, Phil happily accepted it. Finally, he bid farewell first to ask Carol for permission. Upon arriving there, Phil brought the groceries Carol gave him, and Phil immediately asked for permission to camp alone so he could calm his mind. Without much ado, Carol allowed Phil to camp as long as Phil was happy. At night, in his bar, Phil wore a complete suit neatly to meet Gail and Erica. Upon arriving there, he was immediately greeted by two beautiful women who made Phil very happy. Then, without waiting long, Gail told Phil to immediately eat the food they had served. After dinner was over, Phil began to try to regain sympathy from Gail and Erica, where he said he remembered his wife, Carol, who had left him alone on Earth. Not wanting Phil to be sad, Gail and Erica had the idea of inviting Phil to swim together. When hearing the invitation, Phil suddenly felt enthusiastic and agreed to it. But on the other hand, Carol was actually with Melissa and Todd, where they were talking about the kindness Phil always did to them, because they wanted to thank Phil for the service he provided. Finally, Todd invited Melissa and Carol to buy a balloon and some party supplies to welcome Phil back after he finished camping. Carol enthusiastically agreed to that, and they set off. When in the middle of the journey to the swimming pool, Gail and Erica suddenly saw a car approaching them. Initially, Phil told them to turn around, but Gail refused because she wanted to meet other people. Finally, Gail and Erica met Carol, Melissa, and Todd. Where it made Phil more and more panicked, insert panic instrument. And what made Phil more embarrassed was when Gail said she was with a man. Then she introduced the man, but when Carol saw him, it turned out the man was Phil, which surprised Erica because she didn't expect Carol to know Phil. Carol replied that Phil was her husband. After Phil was caught lying, he was immediately judged by everyone. Phil's actions really hurt Carol. Phil explained that he just wanted to make a surprise when he found new people, and he planned to introduce Gail and Erica to Melissa, Carol, and Todd. But no one believed Phil's words. Moreover, Gail said Phil's wife had died. But Phil argued that he did have a wife before Carol, who had the same name. She died in a snow train accident. But no one believed Phil's words until finally everyone there decided to leave Phil alone. After Phil was left behind, he walked through the desert and some streets to return to Tucson. But when he got there, he was not given a chance to explain his intentions and goals for lying to all his friends. Then he went to Carol's house to try to explain what he had done. Wanting to give Phil a chance, Carol let Phil speak. But Carol responded with ghostly language, because she still remembered how Phil said his wife had died. Not wanting to talk with Phil for long, Carol immediately kicked Phil out and considered him back as a stinking nuisance. Feeling dumped, Phil finally chose to go to his favorite bar and decided to stay there with his imaginary friends. He felt that the billiard table felt more comfortable than sleeping on his own bed. The next day, Gail and Erica intended to visit Carol in the hope that she would forget the incident between them and Phil. Erica said she wouldn't do it if she knew Phil was married. But Carol still felt reluctant to accept the food Gail made for her. Moreover, Carol had considered Erica and Gail as seductive women of other people's husbands. Because she was not accepted, finally Gail and Erica decided not to give their food to Carol and decided to keep their distance from her. After Gail and Erica left, Carol was visited by Todd and Melissa, who tried to comfort her. But it seems their efforts were not enough to calm Carol's heart, because Carol had known the tactics they would give her. Carol explained that she didn't need pity from them the way Todd and Melissa kept their distance to respect Carol. Then Carol told Todd and Melissa to leave, because she would be fine even alone. In the bar, in his solitude, Phil began to lament the sadness he experienced for being dumped by his friends. Even his friends had no intention of looking for him. Then he had the idea of changing into someone else. Finally, he visited Carol in different clothes and used a different name. He used the name Mike Miller, claiming to be Phil Miller's brother. But Phil's efforts turned out to be in vain because without saying anything, Carol immediately closed her door again. The next day, Melissa and Todd played golf with Gail and Erica. Where in the middle of the game, they talked about the lies Phil kept saying to them, including when Phil said his middle name was Cormeño. But it turns out Phil knew it while disguised as a weed. Then he lamented his lie, where initially he didn't admit he was lying. But after thinking about some of the lies he kept saying from the beginning of meeting Carol, finally, he realized that he was a liar. Then he was determined to apologize to all his friends. At night, he gathered them all and asked to listen to his explanation. Initially, Melissa didn't want to listen to Phil's explanation. But after Carol gave a second chance, Finally, Melissa was willing to listen to Phil's explanation. Starting with an apology for lying, Phil apologized to everyone he had lied to. Starting from Carol, then Melissa, and continued with Gail and Erica. Then he gave a surprising explanation, where he said he actually didn't love Carol, and when he said he was willing to marry her, he only lied for Carol's pleasure. Hearing that, everyone immediately labeled Phil as the most despicable man in the world. But Phil did not deny that, and then he apologized to everyone. Then Phil left. When Phil left, Carol followed him to the bar that was Phil's favorite place. There, Carol brought a book that would be a witness to their divorce. But Carol wanted them to remain friends even though they were separated. After Phil signed the book, now Carol and Phil had officially divorced, and Phil was allowed to do whatever he wanted. Then Carol bid farewell to Phil, and she would wait for Phil to return home. After Phil and Carol officially divorced, they announced the news to everyone, and they decided to celebrate the divorce joyfully, where Carol asked Gail to play musical instruments so they could dance. The day after the divorce, Phil was suddenly approached by Gail, who began to show interest in him. At first, Phil pretended to be innocent and didn't know what Gail wanted from him. But after Gail gave hints, Phil finally understood Gail's intentions. When Gail was about to show it, suddenly Carol came to Phil's residence, which ultimately Gail decided to return to Phil at 3 p.m. With enthusiasm, Phil prepared for the date. Then the scene shifted to Todd, who made a piece of pancake for Melissa to show his seriousness. Todd explained that initially, his life was dark and empty. But when he met Melissa, Melissa came and immediately brought light to his life. Then Todd declared his love for Melissa. Hoping Melissa would say the opposite, Todd got a painful response when Melissa only said thank you to Todd. Back to Phil, who visited Erica with the excuse of wanting to get milk from the cow at Carol's residence. But apparently Phil got a windfall when Erica suddenly invited him to go hiking. Phil immediately accepted it, but Phil said he had a commitment at 3 and would go hiking with Erica at 5. Finally, Erica agreed, and she would wait for Phil at 5 p.m. Not wanting to waste the opportunity with Gail and Erica, he tried to muster the courage to jump. But the reality was he never dared, and instead screamed for help, hoping one of his companions could find him. At Phil's residence, Gail was ready with a very fitting dress for her to wear. But as she waited for hours, Phil never showed up, and Gail even fell asleep before Erica woke her up. When Erica woke her up, Gail said Phil wouldn't come. Because Phil hadn't shown up, Erica and Gail decided to report to Carol about Phil's disappearance. Carol suspected Phil might have died, so she asked Melissa and Todd to try to find Phil. But when they were going to search for Phil, they suddenly saw a truck coming towards them. Initially, Melissa thought it was Phil, but Carol said it wasn't Phil's truck. Finally, when the truck stopped, a man appeared carrying Phil unconscious. After that, they made a bonfire to warm Phil up and welcome the new person. After the new person sat down, he was asked several questions, including his name. The new person said his real name was Phil Miller, which surprised everyone, but everyone chose to call the new Phil Miller as the original Phil, and asked about Phil's middle name. Phil answered that his middle name was Tandy. When hearing that name, everyone agreed to change the original Phil's name to Tandy and call the new person as the original Phil Miller. After Phil introduced himself, Todd immediately tried to secure the atmosphere, where he introduced himself and Melissa as his girlfriend. The night grew late. They decided to rest, while Tandy instead went to Gail to apologize and demand the promise of a date they would have. But Gail apologized to Tandy because she couldn't do that. Then Gail closed her door. And when Tandy looked at the window, he saw the new Phil laughing with Gail and Erica. Not willing to change his name, the next day Tandy gathered everyone again and introduced himself as the President of the United States with the authority to rule. But apparently that didn't work because everyone disagreed with Tandy's idea. Finally, to determine who was entitled to use the name Phil, new Phil and Tandy decided to compete in playing Stacko. The first person to drop the Stacko stack would lose. New Phil played very well, while Tandy played with arrogance, which caused him to destroy the Stacko stack, and had to admit that the new Phil officially used his name, while he had officially changed his name to Tandy. At night, Tandy intended to visit Carol to talk about something. But when Phil visited her residence, he had seen Carol's house had a new door and saw Carol wearing a beautiful dress. Then Tandy asked what Carol would do. Carol replied that she just wanted to wear that dress. Then Carol said goodbye while bringing food that Tandy suspected would be given to the new Phil. Since Phil hadn't found a new home for himself, Gail and Erica offered Phil to stay with them. But because Phil had built a shed for the cows that had come out of his house, Carol suddenly invited Phil to stay at her house, which made the competition even tighter. Initially, Phil agreed to stay with Carol, but Tandy didn't want that to happen, and he eventually invited Phil to stay with him as bachelor roommates so they could create a bachelor party together. Feeling uneasy, Phil finally decided to stay with Tandy. Then the scene shifted to Todd, who was walking around, where he saw a garbage truck driven by Phil. Phil stopped briefly to greet Todd. After he greeted, Phil drove his garbage truck again. And what surprised Todd was when he saw Melissa riding the garbage truck with Phil. Seeing Melissa having a good time with Phil made Todd hate the new person even more. After seeing the incident, the next day, Todd immediately met Melissa to forbid her from meeting Phil if she wanted their relationship to continue, but Melissa was uncomfortable with what Todd was saying to her. Until finally, if Melissa didn't want to follow his words, then Todd decided to end their relationship. Hoping Melissa would refuse, Melissa instead agreed to it, and she immediately closed her door tightly. Phil increasingly attracted the attention of every woman, where Carol suddenly gave him a scarf she knitted just for Phil. Then there was Gail, who gave Phil food she made herself. At night, they did their usual habit of gathering around the campfire, where Phil said they had to move from Tucson because he thought Tucson wasn't good enough to be a place for humans to survive. But that was immediately rejected by Tandy, who said Tucson was his hometown, which was very suitable to be a new place to live. But Phil immediately asked about the plantations, water, and livestock they could get if they moved from Tucson. And that was agreed upon by the women. Because they didn't want everyone to move, finally, Tandy said he had a farm that he created himself. Interested in Tandy's words, Phil demanded Tandy's promise to show his farm. But Tandy said he couldn't show it tonight, but he promised to show his farm in the morning. After the event was over, Tandy quickly searched for land and started working on the plantation and livestock to show that he could create a new civilization for humans. Meanwhile, Phil was relaxing with Carol. The next morning, after Tandy finished working the land he would use as a plantation, he was suddenly approached by Todd, who informed that Phil had been involved with all the women. This was further reinforced when Tandy saw Melissa wearing a new bathing suit just coming down with Phil. Then Phil suddenly demanded Tandy's promise to show his plantation. Without much talk, Tandy immediately took Phil to his plantation, where he actually planted some jalapeno seeds. Finally, because Tandy could fulfill the promise he made, Phil apologized for everything that caused turmoil. Then he asked Tandy to make amends, and Tandy accepted that apology. But that friendship was shattered when at night where Phil visited Carol and they held a very grand event. Even toasting to Carol the lucky woman, Carol's screams were heard by Tandy, Melissa, who was reading a book, and Todd, who was resigned to the situation. Then Tandy approached Todd, who was daydreaming, and Tandy immediately had the idea to kill Phil. And it seemed to be agreed upon by Todd, who was starting to worry about the presence of the new Phil Miller. After planning the murder of new Phil Miller, Todd and Tandy started monitoring Phil's movements as he tried to assemble a solar panel so they could enjoy electricity again. When Tandy was about to kill Phil by leaving him in the desert, Todd suddenly changed his mind and said that killing was the hardest thing for him to do. Then Todd suddenly remembered when Tandy left him in the desert, and that further strengthened Todd's suspicion that Tandy really wanted to kill Phil. Because he didn't want to be involved, Todd finally withdrew from the plan and left Tandy alone. Since Tandy didn't have a partner, he returned home, and there he found Phil packing his things. Because he was leaving Tandy's place, Phil said he should find a new place to live because he knew Tandy hated him. He also talked about women like Carol, who he thought were very special. Hearing Phil's explanation about Carol's personality, Tandy began to reconsider trying to charm Carol again. Whereafter he discussed with his imaginary friend, Tandy decided to approach Carol while carrying a bouquet of flowers and some jewelry he took from the jewelry store. But when Carol accepted it, she said what Tandy gave didn't mean anything anymore. And soon, Phil suddenly came from behind and hugged Carol. Seeing Phil's presence made Tandy think again. He took back his jewelry and left Carol's house. At night, they held a bonfire party to announce Phil's latest invention, where Phil explained that he had successfully created a solar panel that would likely generate electricity. And it was highly appreciated by Erica, who could finally turn on the AC again, Gail, who could cook again using the electric stove, and Carol, who could finally turn on the lights. Then Phil demonstrated his invention, although he explained that the resources he created were limited. But his invention was highly appreciated by everyone, except Tandy, who suddenly dropped Phil's homemade lamp. And that made Phil very angry. Then he approached Tandy and said Tandy should leave Tucson. Tandy's suffering was further aggravated by Todd, who provided facts that Tandy planned to kill Phil by leaving him in the desert, where he had tried to do that to Todd. Because Tandy's behavior was out of bounds, Phil finally said Tandy should leave. Unwilling to be evicted from his own home, the place where he grew up and his parents were buried, Tandy locked himself up for 3 days, which made him really lonely, without food, and without friends. During his isolation, Tandy only ate tissues and a toothpaste from his stock. Because Carol still worried about Tandy, Carol finally visited him and invited Tandy to go out together. But Tandy said he was fine and didn't want to be friends with anyone anymore. Because he couldn't be disturbed, Carol finally surrendered. But if Tandy changed his mind, then everyone would accept Tandy back at the bonfire party. Because Gail was playing her accordion to welcome Tandy's return. Hearing that invitation, Tandy enthusiastically went out, and sure enough, everyone immediately welcomed Tandy's return. But it seemed that didn't last long, because suddenly Phil came and immediately tackled Tandy until he passed out. When Tandy regained consciousness, he suddenly found himself in a truck with his hands, mouth, and legs tied. Then shortly after, Tandy was dropped in a strange area, where Phil gave Tandy some supplies for him to guard himself when Tandy tried to find another area. And without much talk, Phil left Tandy. Because there was no other choice, finally Tandy tried to survive. He planned to go to the Nogales area to get a car and return to the camp. But 20 minutes later, Tandy's supplies were completely depleted and caused Tandy to be truly stranded for 3 days. After 3 days of being stranded, Tandy suddenly saw his beloved friend, the basketball he named Gary, in front of him. He immediately hugged Gary, which turned out to be brought by Carol. Carol brought Tandy supplies for himself for 3 days. Seeing Carol's concern made Tandy very grateful to her. When Carol was about to leave, she suddenly asked about the song Tandy created for her. Tandy nodded, indicating he really created a song for Carol. Then he sang the song and it made Carol change her mind. She suddenly invited Tandy to find another place, because she couldn't live with someone who really let a man die in the desert, namely Phil, and choose to be with a man who couldn't leave a dead man in a desert, namely Tandy. Finally, the two of them planned to find a new place to live, far from their old settlements. And the last scene in this season shows an astronaut trying to communicate with other humans. Because now he is stuck in space, looking towards the Earth and hoping there are still other humans besides him who are alive. The scene begins with a jet plane that has just arrived at the Presidential Palace of America, the White House. The jet is piloted by Tandy and Carol, who apparently decided to inhabit the White House because Carol still considers Tandy as the President of the United States. Before they entered the White House, Carol bought some supplies for them to live there. After finishing shopping, Carol returned to the jet. But when Tandy was about to restart the jet, he suddenly pressed the wrong button, as he actually activated the bomb the jet possessed. Initially, Tandy told Carol to retrieve the bomb. But considering the jet bomb was very large in size, Carol said she didn't know how to return the bomb to the plane. Finally, Tandy left the bomb, and shortly after the bomb exploded. Upon arriving at the White House, Carol and Tandy did things as they pleased, starting from riding an ATV inside the palace, turning some statues of former American presidents into jokes, and so on. On that night, as they were about to sleep, Carol suddenly poured out her heart if she felt the White House was not a suitable place for them to live, and Carol wanted them to move. Initially, Tandy refused, but because Carol kept whining, finally, Tandy promised to look for a new place the next day. Then the scene changed to the astronaut who was still stuck in space, where he kept trying to communicate with other humans on every island on the face of the Earth. But his efforts were always in vain, even his attempts to communicate with every living creature on Earth. And the only friends accompanying the astronaut in space were 2 caterpillars he named Terry and Nancy. The next day, Tandy blindfolded Carol because he wanted to surprise her with their new home. And when they arrived there, it turned out Tandy took Carol to his hometown, that is Delaware, which made Carol very happy. Then Carol immediately introduced her old house, where she showed her family, friends, and some knitting clubs she had joined. She also introduced her sister's room and her room filled with handmade items by Carol herself to remember friends and family who died because of the virus. But just one day after they lived in Delaware, Carol again questioned their place of residence, where now she wanted to have a house with occupants. And the only house with occupants was Tucson, inhabited by people who hated Tandy. Their conversation caused various problems because Tandy was offended, while Carol was disappointed because Tandy couldn't fulfill her wish. Until finally, Carol decided to separate beds with Tandy. But because he didn't want her and Carol to have problems again, Tandy finally complied with Carol's request to return to Tucson. where along the way Carol and Tandy didn't say a word. Then Tandy decided to refuel and buy some supplies. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to him, Carol was looking for a suitable dress to adorn herself. But that turned out to be a problem. When Tandy finished refueling, he forgot about Carol's presence. Carol tried to stop Tandy by firing a gun to make Tandy aware of her presence. But because Tandy turned on very loud music, he couldn't hear the sign of Carol's presence. Finally, Carol had to be alone at the gas station. While Tandy, who had just arrived in Tucson, just realized that he lost Carol. Finally, Tandy tried to find her again by remembering the gas station he had descended. But Tandy only remembered one gas station name. That is Speedy Bump. Finally, he tried to find that gas station, which turned out Speedy Bump had many branches. Then Tandy decided to remain silent in Tucson while waiting for Carol to possibly follow him. Upon arriving in Tucson, he disguised himself to avoid the wrath of the people who hated him. But when he looked towards his former house, turns out the Tucson family disappeared, and Tandy's house was found burnt down, while Carol continued to sound her gun to give a warning if she was there. But Tandy never realized her presence, and he just sat quietly on their old bench. In the midst of her loneliness, Carol tries to do what Tandy often does, which is to chat with inanimate objects. And Carol names the inanimate object the same as Tandy's name, which is Phil. Day by day, Carol goes through it. All sorts of ways she tries to signal that she is at the EMCO gas station, not Speedy Bump. But everything is in vain. Meanwhile, in Tucson, after Tandy talked about several topics with his imaginary friend, Tandy finally had an idea. He writes the words Tandy in Tucson on several balloons in the hope they will fly past Carol's location. But that too is in vain before Tandy finds a railroad track, and he has another brilliant idea. In the midst of his resignation, Carol suddenly hears something moving and making noise. Finally, she approached the source of the sound, which turned out to be a moving train. In each train carriage, it is written that it comes from Tandy. He signals that he is not on the train. Instead, he is in Tucson. Happy to see the sign Tandy gave, Carol immediately tries to find a car and goes straight to Tucson. In Tucson, Tandy tries another way. That is, he runs a Tandy in Tucson truck. But when Stum is operated, it turns out that Stum crushes one of Tandy's best friends, Gary. Tandy looked very sad about Gary's loss due to being run over by the Stum truck he was operating. But all of that turned into happiness when he saw a car driven by Carol. Then they returned to Tucson and lived together, where Carol apparently still hopes that she can meet others. But all of that doesn't matter because Carol is still happy if Tandy is still with her. Then she prepares something for Tandy and asks him to wait a moment. While waiting for Carol, Tandy prepares to pour a drink for the both of them. But when he picked up the bottle of drink, he received a letter from Melissa informing that their family had moved to Malibu. And if Carol wants to go there, Melissa hopes Carol won't bring disaster. That is Tandy, because he doesn't want Carol to leave without him. Tandy tries to hide the letter from Carol, but it seems the letter becomes a nightmare for Tandy, because when he falls asleep, he dreams of being left by Carol, who knows everyone has moved to Malibu. He quickly tries to follow her, but in the middle of the road, he is intercepted by Phil's hand trying to kill him. Then he had another nightmare where the person sleeping next to him was Melissa carrying a weapon and shooting him towards Tandy. After that nightmare happened, Tandy told his friends about his confusion of having to lie to Carol, to outsmart the presence of his friends. At night, Tandy made replicas of every person who ever lived in Tucson, but that only added to the longing Carol experienced. Finally, because he felt sorry, Tandy gave Melissa's letter that he found, and said that everyone had moved to Malibu. Instead of wanting to go, Carol actually doesn't want it anymore if they don't want Tandy with her. But because Tandy really wants to grant Carol's wish to meet her friends again, he outsmarts Carol, where he invites Carol to get drunk. And after Carol gets drunk, the next day Carol wakes up in their van heading to Malibu. Upon arriving there, they disguise themselves again and finally manage to find Melissa and the others. When they watched Melissa and the others move, Tandy found a new man joining them. Finally, out of curiosity, Carol had an idea, where she moves unnoticed to approach them all. And when Carol comes, she suddenly startles the new person until he has a heart attack and dies. Seeing the new person named Gordon suddenly die from being startled by Carol, everyone immediately helps him. But instead of being sad, Carol is happy because her plan with Tandy succeeds. After Gordon's death, Carol had to take responsibility for her actions, where she was required to be the host for Gordon's funeral. At Gordon's funeral, Carol pretended to be sad about the death of someone she didn't know. It was evident that her friends were very sad because they had lost Gordon. One of them was Gail, who turned out to be Gordon's lover. After the funeral, Carol immediately returned to their van and told Tandy that everything was okay. Then Carol returned to the crowd and was immediately introduced to their new home by Melissa, who explained that their new home was Gordon's house. They met Gordon at a beach, and it turned out that Gordon invited them to live together. After that, they gathered in the living room to remember Gordon's personality, which according to Gail was very kind, a trustworthy advisor, and a valuable lover. So close that Todd truly felt sad about Gordon's departure, who according to Gail had been in search. After Gordon's memorial service was over, they began to interrogate Carol about her life after leaving Tucson. Carol recounted how she had briefly lived with Tandy, but not long because Tandy was found dead. Then she told Todd and Melissa how Tandy died, where Tandy's place of death was at the Grand Canyon, when she tried to save herself from attempting a handstand at the edge of the Grand Canyon. Then because Carol slipped, Tandy tried to help her, but Tandy had to accept his fate when he slipped and fell to the bottom of the cliff and died. When Carol finished her story, Todd suddenly cried moved, which Carol assumed was sadness about Tandy's death. But Todd actually said that Carol's story reminded him of Gordon. Then they suddenly saw Gail on the beach performing a ritual that Melissa called spiritual healing, where she wrote Gordon's name on the beach to commemorate him. Apparently, Carol used it as an idea, where she mimicked what Gail did by writing Tandy's name. Then Phil approached her and said he didn't want to see Carol unhappy about Tandy's death and wanted Carol to come back to him. But Carol still remembered that Phil had a partner, Erica. Phil replied that he had just broken up with Erica to be back with her. But unfortunately, Carol rejected him outright. Then the scene switched back to Gordon's commemoration, where Gail decorated a doll to resemble what Gordon wore. But when she told the story, she couldn't hold back her sadness about Gordon's death, until Carol took over the atmosphere and began to talk about Tandy. She wanted everyone to remember Tandy, which people actually remember his faults. Todd remembered how Tandy tried to kill him by leaving him in the desert, and Phil who still remembers when Tandy had a desire to kill him. But Carol didn't care because she wanted to present to everyone that Tandy was still alive. Still afraid to rejoin, Tandy asked Carol to cancel it. But people were not happy with Tandy's return to life and decided to disband. Because her plan failed, Carol decided to return to Tucson, where she bid farewell to her friends first. But when Carol was about to say goodbye, suddenly her friends reappeared and began to discuss the issue of accepting Tandy's return. Happy to hear that, Carol quickly recounted the changes that Tandy had given her. She promised everyone that the old Tandy was dead, because what remained was Tandy who was reborn into a normal human being. After a fairly long negotiation, finally, Melissa and others agreed to give Tandy a second chance. Meanwhile, feeling disbelieved again, Tandy had a crazy idea to regain the trust of his friends, where he suddenly appeared before the crowd while carrying a gun to threaten them all to listen to him. Because they were afraid, eventually, everyone surrendered and raised their hands. Finally, Tandy apologized to everyone for the mistakes he had made, starting with an apology to Phil for intending to kill him, then to Todd for intending to leave him in the desert. Then he apologized to Melissa, Gail, and Erica for lying to him. But in the turmoil Tandy made, Carol suddenly said that everyone would indeed give Tandy a second chance. Hearing that, he immediately released his gun and promised that he had changed 100%. But when Tandy let go of his gun, he was suddenly restrained by Phil, and he was tied up until Phil allowed him to leave. After several days of being tied up, Tandy began to suffer and asked for a little help from his friends, where he asked for a glass of water that he desperately needed. Then an angel named Melissa came and brought a bottle of mineral water, and Tandy immediately thanked her. But instead of helping, Melissa actually made things worse because she left the bottle of water in Tandy's hands that he couldn't reach. Finally, Tandy could only waste the water by trying to pour it into his mouth, hoping that a few drops would land in his mouth. Then Phil approached Tandy carrying a pistol. He threatened Tandy for all sorts of things. But it turned out to be just a bluff that Phil did because last night, Tandy did the same thing to everyone. Because Tandy couldn't bear to be tied up continuously, Carol finally negotiated back the punishment that would be given to Tandy. Phil suggested that Tandy should be in isolation for a week. But Tandy refused because he thought the punishment was too long. He asked to be confined for only 2 to 3 days. But that couldn't be refused. And if Tandy refused, he would be tied up again. Because he couldn't do anything, finally Tandy surrendered and he was isolated in a room temporarily. After Tandy was confined, Todd, Melissa, and Carol enjoyed homemade cheese made by Todd using their cow's milk, where Melissa and Carol enjoyed every bite of the cheese. In the distance, Tandy could only watch his friends enjoying the food that they rarely got. But at night, when everyone was asleep, Tandy dared to leave his isolation room and went straight to the dining table to eat the remaining cheese there. Initially, Tandy had to argue with himself because he wanted to remain obedient to the punishment given to him so that he could reunite as before. But due to his hunger, Tandy had to break the punishment, not far from the dining table. Melissa was seen reading her favorite book because she was worried about being caught. Tandy slowly backed away from the dining table and immediately returned to isolation. But Tandy was apparently having a stroke of bad luck because he bumped into one of the musical instruments which immediately made a sound. Finally, Melissa screamed that Tandy broke the punishment. Because Tandy broke the rules, everyone agreed to add punishment to Tandy. And the punishment Tandy had to receive was that he had to wear an electric necklace just like the one they put on the cows. Where if Tandy crossed the safe limit of the necklace, then Tandy would be shocked by the electric current flowing through the necklace. Tandy accepted the punishment gracefully because he admitted his mistake and was ready to undergo additional punishment. The next day, Tandy tried to be friendly by greeting everyone who just woke up from their sleep. But the steps Tandy took actually worsened his punishment because Melissa said she would add punishment to Tandy. Namely, he was forbidden to speak for a while. Because he didn't want to be judged by others, Tandy took the initiative to ask Carol to buy him a new necklace, where the necklace was a voice detector necklace that would release lemongrass fluid. If Tandy spoke, then the fluid would spray by itself. When Tandy tried it, it turned out that the necklace worked well and made Tandy reluctant to speak. The next day, Tandy began to get used to the punishment he received, where Tandy really lowered his voice volume so that the spraying necklace didn't release its fluid. Then suddenly Melissa approached Tandy carrying a bucket containing beer. It made Tandy even more tempted. He asked for the beer, but Melissa actually put it beyond the boundaries that Tandy couldn't reach. Finally, all day he tried to reach the beer. But Tandy actually worsened his punishment again when he damaged some pots to take one bucket of beer. Todd was very angry when he found out Tandy had damaged Gordon's pots. But Carol tried to defend Tandy by asking her friends to listen to his explanation first. Because he didn't want to make a sound, finally Tandy acted out what he was doing. But it became a joke, because people thought Tandy was doing a charade. Everyone guessed Tandy very messily. No one could guess what Tandy was mimicking. Until finally, when Todd and Phil were tired of everything Tandy did, Phil made an innovation where he finally locked Tandy in a cage so that he couldn't do anything. At night, when Tandy was asleep, he suddenly heard something, and when Tandy checked out, apparently, the fire hit one of the walls in Gordon's house. He tried to scream, but his efforts were in vain because the spraying necklace continued to release its fluid. Finally, because no one was aware of what was happening, Tandy ignored the electric shock, ignored the pepper spray to stop the fire. He immediately got out of the cage, took the bucket, and tried to stop the fire. When he tried to stop the fire, Tandy had to endure the pain he had to get from the necklace that tied him up. Then after the fire was extinguished, Tandy returned to his cage. And the next day, people found that the wall was burnt. There they began to blame each other. But no one wanted to admit until they asked Tandy. Assisted by Carol, Tandy acted out if when he was asleep. He suddenly heard something, and it turned out that what he heard was a blazing fire. Because people were asleep, he tried to stop the fire, even though he had to be shocked. He continued to insist on stopping the fire until finally, the fire went out and he returned to his cage. Thanks to his heroic act, everyone agreed to stop punishing Tandy, and he was finally released. And the last scene in this episode shows Todd sneaking away in the night to a room with a very happy face. One day after Tandy was released, he tried to blend in again by entertaining his friends. However, Tandy's efforts were in vain because everyone was focused on a cricket sound they had just heard. Finally, with their spirits up, they all searched for the cricket and collected it to be made into a meal. But when the crickets were collected and processed into food, Carol actually turned them into a bowl of cricket soup that made everyone very queasy. But Carol tried to convince them that the soup she made was very delicious. She demonstrated by eating it. And Carol seemed to enjoy the dish very much, even when the crickets she cooked were still alive. Because he didn't want to disappoint Carol, Tandy joined in and pretended to say that Carol's cooking was very delicious. The next day, Tandy tried to find crickets again to be made into their dinner, but hoped that Gail would be the one to cook them, as everyone knew she was a chef. While Tandy was looking for crickets, he suddenly saw Todd coming out of a very strange room. Curious, Tandy entered the room without Todd's knowledge. And when Tandy entered the room, he saw a refrigerator and a freezer unit containing. After knowing Todd's secret, Tandy tried to trap him. When Todd returned to the room, Tandy followed him and caught him trying to open the freezer. Then Tandy asked about Todd's secret room, which had electricity and a freezer containing fresh frozen meat. Knowing Todd's secret, Tandy tried to threaten him by saying he would report the incident to everyone. Then he ran out and Todd panicked and tried to chase him, but when Tandy got out, he actually went back in and asked Todd to cook for him. Finally, the two of them enjoyed the smoked meat that they hadn't eaten for years. They continued to do it repeatedly. Even Todd and Tandy never wanted to eat insects, which they now made into their food. But disaster struck when their stock of smoked meat began to run out. Then Tandy had the idea of giving the rest of their smoked meat stock to everyone. They did this so as not to arouse suspicion among their friends. But Todd refused, saying he didn't want to share the meat he found with people, because he didn't want to be greedy. Finally, Tandy took the initiative to clean up all the evidence, threw it into the sea. And the next day, Gail suddenly screamed because she found some smoked meat neatly wrapped with the words from Todd. Thanks to the discovery, Todd was considered a hero because they could finally eat delicious food other than Carol's cricket dishes. But the title of hero for Todd didn't last long, because they suddenly saw some garbage coming back from the sea. Then they checked the garbage, which made Tandy panic. He tried to clean up every piece of smoked meat plastic trash he hid, but it was too late until Melissa found out the truth. Then Todd admitted that he was the one who found the smoked meat. He claimed he didn't want to share it with people because he felt it was very rare, and he admitted he was greedy. Not wanting Todd to be blamed alone, Tandy did the same thing, where he blamed himself too because he didn't report the incident. The two of them apologized for what they had just done, feeling they had to be punished. Finally, Tandy and Todd had to face the guillotine punishment together. Because Todd had misbehaved, it strained his relationship with Melissa even further, as Melissa kept bringing up the smoked meat Todd had hidden. But to avoid any conflict, Tandy tried to change their conversation topic by discussing the worsening gasoline condition on Earth. Actually, Phil had explained this condition where gasoline would only last for 3 years, while diesel would only last 1 or 2 years longer than gasoline. And this is why he had to say they should leave Malibu as soon as possible and find another place, because they didn't want to keep moving around, especially since Gail still cherished her memories with Gordon. Everyone rejected the idea, and the situation worsened when Carol began to link it to her plan to have a child. Finally, Gail provoked all the women to say they were happy in Malibu and would never go anywhere. Tired of all the situations, Phil finally decided to part ways with them and began looking for a new place. He hoped everyone could live without him feeling like he was the only one doing all the work, because Phil decided to leave. The next day, Tandy started trying to take over the role Phil left behind, where he tried to make solar panels so they could live safer and more comfortably in Malibu. Wanting to thank Tandy for his service, Todd helped him make the solar panels. But Todd's presence actually didn't produce anything, because they messed up when they couldn't control the electricity flow. Then the scene shifted to Carol, who wanted to campaign for all women to have children, where she showed her painting depicting Melissa and Todd's future child. Seeing Carol's painting made Melissa more convinced that she would never want to have a child, especially with Todd. Back to Todd and Tandy trying to conquer the electricity flow. The two of them wanted to prove that they could live without Phil. But after trying for so long, Tandy and Todd still couldn't stop the electricity flow. Until finally, with a heavy heart and embarrassment, Tandy approached Phil, who was in the neighboring house, to ask for his help. But Phil refused with the excuse that he was busy. Annoyed because Phil didn't want to help him, Tandy provoked Phil by saying Phil was not worthy of Carol. Therefore, Carol chose him to be her husband. Hearing Tandy's taunts made Phil quite emotional. He immediately hit Tandy, which made everyone gather. Seeing Tandy beaten up made people hate Phil even more. They came up with an idea to punish Phil. But Phil refused the punishment and chose to go to his room. But feeling Phil had to be punished, they continued to chase him and hold Phil accountable. As minimal as possible, he had to be restrained. But Phil still didn't want the punishment and didn't care about anyone. He even said he didn't regret hitting Tandy, which he should have done a long time ago. Because Phil was stubborn, they had to reluctantly work together to stop the electricity flow. When they were just staring at the electricity flowing on its own, Phil suddenly came and immediately became a hero for them, where he approached the electricity flow and began to stop its flow by turning off the on-off button. It's that simple, but Todd and Tandy couldn't do it. After the electricity went out, Phil approached everyone and said something. Phil explained that he had decided to go to Canada and leave everyone to find a better life. He quickly packed his things and got ready to leave. Just before Phil left, he suddenly talked to Carol about the feelings he had been holding back. Even Phil confessed his love to Carol and invited her to stay with him and follow him to Canada. When Phil said that, the situation changed 180 degrees when Erica suddenly spoke up if she was pregnant with Phil's child. That is, Erica is currently pregnant. After Phil expressed his love to Carol and Carol found out about Erica's pregnancy, she firmly refused to be with Phil. Meanwhile, Phil immediately tried to talk to Erica about their child. However, Gail prevented him from speaking to Erica because she didn't want Erica to get close to Phil again. Eventually, Phil found himself isolated, without friends, and unable to leave Malibu because he would soon have a child. Feeling sidelined, Tandy attempted to regain his throne. He continuously sought attention, starting from discussing the injury on his face caused by Phil's punch to asking about remedies for his face. However, the outcome was futile as no one cared. During lunch, Phil returned and once again tried to talk to Erica, claiming he had something for her. However, all the women agreed not to approve of it. Consequently, Phil retreated again. Curious about Phil's actions, Tandy observed Phil, who had made a baby carriage long before his child was born. Still resentful, Tandy tried to act indifferent. Still in search of attention, Tandy was willing to do anything as long as everyone paid attention to him. Gail then tried her luck by asking for Tandy's help to fetch her favorite chips from the supermarket. With joy, Tandy took the request and went to the supermarket to get Gail's favorite chips. After fetching Gail's favorite chips and delivering them, Tandy remained curious about what was happening with Phil. Approaching Phil, who was disposing of the baby carriage he had made, Tandy observed his presence. Phil asked him to step away because he didn't want Tandy to approach him again. But Tandy would only advise Phil to willingly accept being restrained and follow his plan. Because that way, Phil would soon be accepted back by their community. But Phil didn't believe that right away. And instead, he regretted saving Tandy's life on the billboard. Then Phil left Tandy. The situation began to change when everyone started prioritizing their own busyness. Starting from Carol, who decided to check her pregnancy by continuously searching for a pregnancy checker. On one side, Gail, who still felt and missed Gordon's presence, was willing to make a doll that she dressed just like Gordon. Erica, holding a gift from Carol for her first child while waiting for certainty about whether she would consider Phil the father of her child. Todd, who decided to sleep on the couch after breaking up with Melissa, and likewise with Melissa. When Tandy tried to talk to Todd sleeping on the couch, he suddenly looked towards the beach and there Phil was lying helpless. Finally, Tandy quickly approached him and tried to bring Phil to the shore. Despite the difficulty of moving Phil's body, Tandy kept trying to save Phil.
Let me out. Friggin' fart face. Freaking idiot Finn here. You see me? Oh, hi, Phil's penis. That about leave me up on that billboard. Both off leash. I wish I was a lot more. Realize is I looked up to you like the whole time.
Until finally, Tandy succeeded in moving Phil. After he moved him, Tandy immediately joined Carol, who had fallen asleep first. As Tandy was about to fall asleep, suddenly he heard Phil's voice calling his name. Instead of moving him to his residence, Tandy actually moved Phil to be restrained. In the morning, Tandy quickly summoned everyone to witness Phil, whom he claimed had restrained himself. However, Phil stated that it was Tandy who had restrained him. But the people weren't interested in that. Instead, they were more interested in the cow that kept making noise until they approached the cow. They discovered that the cow had given birth to another calf. Seeing that the cow could reproduce, everyone immediately had the idea to find the male cow to further expand their breeding efforts. They formed a team and divided into several areas to search for the whereabouts of the male cow. Meanwhile, Tandy left Phil, who kept asking to be released, promising to bring the male cow to him. Back to Tandy. After hearing Phil's explanation promising to bring the male cow, he coordinated it with his community. Tandy presented how their chances of getting the male cow quickly would increase with Phil's help. Trusting Phil's work, they agreed to end his punishment. Then Tandy quickly informed Phil of this, and he immediately released him. Instead of joining the others to search for the male cow, Phil went to his car and told Tandy to relay his message to the others, never to care about him again. Then Phil just left. The scene then shifted to the astronaut named Mike Miller, still trying to communicate with other humans via radio. As he continued to talk, he suddenly heard another voice. Mike promptly responded to the conversation. But when he became excited, Thinking his efforts had paid off, it turned out the other voice was just his own echoing. Finally, frustrated, he damaged the radio and resigned to his fate. The scene then moved to a dinner event, where Tandy wanted to clarify why everyone started focusing on their own affairs. Tandy gave each of them a stone to lament if they were to live alone out there without anyone else's help. But it seemed like everyone didn't care much, especially Melissa, who was tired of Tandy's words. However, Tandy asked her to sit for a moment and listen to his explanation. As Tandy was about to explain, Gale suddenly interrupted and blamed Melissa. This led to chaos, with everyone blaming each other. Fed up with it all, Tandy threw the stone he was holding out the window, causing it to break and everyone to fall silent. The next day, everyone gathered silently in the living room and went about their business. Melissa read a book, Erica ate food for pregnant women, Gale kept drinking, Tandy did something unclear, Carol knitted, and Todd just contemplated after regretting his breakup with Melissa. In the midst of loneliness and silence, the situation became cheerful when they suddenly saw a big male cow right in front of them, brought by Phil. Without hesitation, they slaughtered it and turned it into steaks, holding a lavish dinner. And of course, they were happy, momentarily forgetting their individual problems, including Phil, who was eventually invited to dinner, enjoying the steak that they hadn't had for a long time. Carol came up with the idea to celebrate Christmas, preparing slips of paper containing all the Tucson family members' names. Gathering everyone, including Phil, she initiated a gift exchange where each person drew a name and would then give a gift to the person whose name they drew. After the event, everyone went about their activities, except Phil, who remained isolated due to his past actions. Feeling sorry for him, Tandy pleaded with everyone to allow him to meet Phil, and Erica agreed, granting Tandy permission. Quickly, Tandy went to Phil's house and gave him a slip with Erica's name, implying Phil should give Erica a gift to mend their relationship. However, instead of gratitude, Phil slammed the door in Tandy's face. On the night of the event, Phil arrived with great dignity, prepared to deliver a speech thanking someone who never gave up on him, saving his life. Tandy hoped to be the one mentioned and prepared a warm embrace, but Phil referred to God instead, disappointing Tandy. In space, Mike remained adrift without communication, gazing at a family photo with Tandy in it. His sadness deepened when he had to administer bitter pills to his beloved pet, Terry, who couldn't survive much longer. The next day, the gift exchange began. Carol enthusiastically started with a brief speech, followed by Erica, who announced she got Carol's name. She presented Carol with a special chair used in the Oprah studio and a scarf from Carol's favorite singer. Next was Todd, who declared his gift for someone special, leading Melissa to hope she was the one, but Todd chose Gale. He led everyone outside to reveal a vintage luxury car, thrilling Gale but keeping their relationship discreet. Then it was Tandy's turn, but he picked his own name. He gifted himself a useless cruise ship and blew it up in front of everyone when it proved worthless. The exchange continued with Carol giving a large box containing shooting boots to Melissa, who reluctantly accepted it. Melissa, in turn, gave Todd a crown and scepter to ease his high school prom memories. Phil, having Erica's name, apologized and led everyone to a room where he gave Erica a medical device to see her baby's movements, bringing tears to her eyes and forgiveness to Phil. That night, they celebrated Christmas with Melissa unexpectedly proposing to Todd and Phil collapsing in agony. In space, Mike, about to give up, spotted a single caterpillar, renewing his hope and canceling his plan to exit the rocket. After being thrown into space, Mike immediately extended the emergency rope that allowed him to return to the rocket, and finally, he took care of a newly born caterpillar. Remembering his twin, he named the caterpillar Phil. Back in Malibu, Phil's condition became more critical. Gale, who had some medical background, tried to diagnose what Phil was experiencing. Initially, Gale diagnosed Phil with just a common cold, but Phil refuted it because what he felt was much different from a common cold. Finally, Gale consulted medical guidebooks and eventually found a disease similar to what Phil described, appendicitis. Then Gale said Phil needed to be operated on immediately to remove the appendix. But since there were no other doctors besides Gale, everyone tried to persuade her to handle Phil's surgery. At first, Gale refused because she didn't dare to perform a major surgery, especially since she wasn't a doctor. But after Erica persuaded her and asked for help directly, Gale agreed to operate on Phil with the condition that she must learn the procedure for appendectomy first. Initially, Gale tried to learn the surgery by cutting a pie, but she felt that method was not effective for learning. Eventually, Gale asked Tandy to fulfill her wish, which was to learn using a cadaver. Yes, Gail asked Todd and Tandy to find a cadaver for her to use in learning surgery. Tandy and Todd then went to the hospital to find a cadaver that still had complete organs. But after several checks, they couldn't find the cadaver, so Tandy had an idea. He went to an old cemetery and tried to dig up a fresh-looking corpse, then brought it back to Malibu. However, when Tandy and Todd brought it back to Malibu and explained that they had a problem with the cadaver being in the hospital, so they had to dig up the grave, Gail suddenly said she had found what she needed, a toy doll used for surgical student learning. Feeling sorry for bringing the corpse, Tandy and Phil decided to put it back in its original grave. The situation worsened when Phil kept groaning in pain while Gail was pressured to learn faster. But when Erica asked Gail to finish her learning, she suddenly panicked when she saw Phil walking and shortly after became unconscious again. After seeing Phil unconscious, Gail immediately tried her best to perform surgery. Accompanied by Todd, who tried to convince Gail that she could do the surgery, the operation finally began. Meanwhile, on another side, Mike decided to descend to Earth, resigned and hoping to land safely. Back to the surgery, when Gail felt she had found the appendix causing Phil's pain, she immediately removed it. But it seemed she performed the procedure wrong, causing Phil to bleed. Everyone panicked seeing Phil's condition and Gail and Todd tried to stop the bleeding. But they couldn't do much, and slowly Phil's blood thinned, and he was declared dead. Meanwhile, Mike was racing with light and time to penetrate back into Earth's atmosphere. The scene begins with Mike Miller finally managing to return to Earth and safely landing on a ship sailing in the middle of the sea. After landing, he quickly grabbed one of the rowboats he used to seek help. Day by day, he went through looking for anyone who could help him. After traveling quite a distance, Mike finally found a cruise ship, which he immediately boarded and ate all the food on board. Afterward, he drank some drinks and put on new clothes that he hadn't used in a long time. But when Mike was in that happy condition, suddenly a mysterious person appeared and immediately pointed an arrow at Mike, threatening him. Afraid, Mike introduced himself as Mike Miller, an astronaut who had just arrived on Earth after 3 years in space. But this person accused Mike of being the one spreading the virus on Earth. However, Mike swore he knew nothing about it. Trusting Mike after he apologized for his behavior, the mysterious man finally agreed to help Mike. Then they introduced themselves, where the owner of the boat was named Pat Brown. Then Mike had the idea of going back to land so they could restock for survival. But Pat said that the supplies he had now were more than enough. Then Pat asked Mike's intentions for wanting to return to land. Mike replied that he had a family, and he still hoped his family would be found alive so he could be back with them, especially since he didn't know the condition of the Earth after leaving for 3 years. But Pat didn't explain and instead told Mike to rest in his room. In the morning, Pat woke Mike up, and he finally decided to go to land as Mike wanted. But Pat said they would do it his way. Then Mike agreed, and they set off for the shore wearing surgical attire, covered in antivirus fabric, and masked faces. Upon arrival on land, Mike immediately touched the sand and said he missed Earth very much. Not wanting to waste too much time, Pat immediately took Mike to search for food supplies. In the middle of the journey, Mike suddenly asked about the whereabouts of all the corpses declared dead from the virus. Understanding that Mike had just returned to Earth, Pat showed Mike some corpses lined up due to the deadly virus that hit the Earth. Then Pat tried to convince Mike about his belief regarding his family, whether they were still alive or maybe among the corpses they saw. After seeing the corpses, then Pat asked Mike to comply with his request. That is to play tennis. Because he was still stiff and hadn't adjusted his movements on Earth with space, Mike had to admit Pat's superiority. After finishing the tennis game, they continued their journey, where they were on an elevated road. Mike suddenly asked Pat to stop the car, but because he didn't want Mike to see something, Pat stepped on the gas until the car sped up. Luckily, Mike managed to hold the car and he could see something, namely the inscription "Still Alive in Tucson," written by Tandy. Then very happily Mike said someone was still alive in his hometown. But suddenly Pat came and immediately hit Mike until he passed out. When he woke up, Mike suddenly found himself on the beach where Pat was going to do something to him. But Mike tried to fight Pat until finally a brief fight ensued, won by Pat. When Pat was about to do what he wanted, he suddenly saw a tear in Mike's clothing. Because he didn't want to catch the virus, Pat kept Mike among the corpses affected by the virus. And it turned out, Mike was still alive, and he immediately left Pat to go to Tucson. After Phil Miller was pronounced dead due to the appendicitis he suffered, everyone quickly bathed and laid him in the coffin. It was evident that everyone deeply mourned Phil, especially Erica, who was pregnant with his child. After the ceremony, Tandy gave a brief speech, and afterward, he sent Phil's coffin out to sea. Then everyone started to go about their activities. While Tandy and Carol were together, Tandy suddenly said he wanted to talk to Carol. Curiously, Carol looked at Tandy's face, who told her that Todd and Gail had become involved. Hearing this startled Carol because she remembered Todd was Melissa's boyfriend. However, Tandy explained that Todd had ended his relationship with Melissa and asked Carol not to tell Melissa about it yet. Carol really wanted to tell her friend, but she didn't want to break her promise and promised to keep the secret. That night, in remembrance of their friend, Tandy decided to perform a song he had composed especially for Phil. Tandy earnestly tuned his guitar first to make it sound better. But when he played the song, Tandy didn't touch the guitar at all. Instead, he used it as a percussion instrument. Feeling embarrassed because no one was touched by his song, Tandy pretended to leave, saying he hadn't finished the song yet. Then the scene shifted to Todd approaching Melissa to talk about his rejection of Melissa's proposal. Melissa replied that she didn't care about it anymore and now saw Todd only as a friend. She even invited Todd to watch TV for the sake of their friendship. Todd agreed, seeing Melissa only as a friend. After meeting Melissa, Todd approached Gail, with whom he had plans beforehand. But when Gail was ready, Todd suddenly said he had business with Melissa first. He apologized to Gail and promised to return soon once his business with Melissa was finished. With a hint of anger, Gail allowed Todd to deal with his issues with Melissa. The scene then shifted to Tandy, who had an idea to commemorate his friend. He renovated the baby carriage that Phil had created for his unborn baby, and he immediately gave the carriage to Erica, even saying that Phil had told him to take care of Erica and their baby. But that was just empty talk because Erica knew better about what Phil had said. The last thing Phil said to her was, "Don't let Tandy raise our child," meaning Phil didn't want Tandy to take care of his child. Feeling ashamed, Tandy decided not to give the baby carriage, which turned out to be broken again, and decided to leave. In Melissa's room, Todd not only watched TV but also dated Melissa again. Although Todd's face showed guilt for cheating on Gail, he continued the event until the next morning. Melissa went to Carol and told her everything. She had a feeling that she would be back together with Todd. Hearing the story, Carol could only be happy while keeping Todd's dark secret. The last scene in this episode shows Tandy deciding to burn all of Phil's personal belongings after learning the fact that Phil didn't want Tandy to raise his child. Instead of wanting Phil to stay away from him, he suddenly saw Phil's coffin coming back from the sea. Then Erica approached Tandy. Eventually, they both decided to bury Phil's body rather than dispose of his corpse at sea. The scene begins with Phil suddenly having to comply with Carol's continuous request for him to check his readiness to have children. Confused about what to do, Phil simply follows Carol's instructions, where she creates a special method to make Phil feel comfortable, safe, and calm during the checkup. Meanwhile, on the other side, Todd faces a difficult situation where he must divide his love between two women he deeply cares about, Gail and Melissa. Whenever Todd tries to be honest about his feelings, he's always held back because neither Gail nor Melissa gives him the chance to express himself. Returning to Phil, who continues to search for ways to fake the fertility test he must provide to Carol. Starting from collecting samples, he becomes frustrated because Carol keeps asking for the results he's conducted. While Todd remains confused about what to say to Gail and Melissa regarding his actions towards both of them, he suddenly finds himself overwhelmed because he feels he's become too burdened to be a playboy. This time, as Todd struggles, Erica approaches him with a message from the late Phil. Phil's wish is for Todd to be the father of their baby, as Phil believes Todd's hardworking and honest nature would be beneficial for the child. In the interest of the baby's well-being, Todd gladly agrees to Phil's wish, reassuring Erica that he'll do anything for the baby's welfare. Afterward, Todd rushes towards the beach, screaming loudly out of frustration for finding himself in a situation where he has to love 3 women. To vent his emotions, Todd even takes a jet ski and rides it towards the shore while shouting loudly. In Tandy's situation, she finally passes the fertility test and is declared infertile. Initially, she intends to tell Carol the truth. However, when she's in front of Carol, she suddenly lies and says she tested positive and is ready to have a child. Hearing this, Carol is thrilled and immediately hugs Tandy. Later, the scene shifts to the women gathered on a beach to enjoy a sunset. Tandy eventually confesses the truth about her infertility in front of Carol. However, when Tandy is about to reveal this, Carol's attention is diverted to Todd, who suddenly rides a jet ski towards the shore. Todd approaches them and finally admits that he had relationships with Melissa, Gail, and even kissed Erica. Hearing this, the 3 women are shocked and label Todd as a playboy. Todd accepts this and explains that he's confused because he only wanted to help his family and maximize what he could do to assist them. Then, he sincerely apologizes to Gail, Melissa, and Erica. After Todd's confession, it's Tandy's turn to tell the truth directly to Carol. Tandy explains that she can't have children because she's infertile and apologizes. Instead of getting angry, Carol points behind Tandy and asks everyone to look in that direction. It turns out Carol sees a man running towards them from a distance. Seeing him, Tandy seems to recognize the man and immediately runs to confront him, only to realize that the man is Mike Miller, her own brother. After hitting Mike, Tandy immediately asks why Mike is showing up now after the virus has spread worldwide for so long. Mike explains that he has been in outer space for 3 years and knows nothing about the Earth's condition. Due to their bond, Tandy stops his attack and hugs Mike. Then, he introduces Mike to everyone as his biological brother. After the introduction, Mike quickly blends in with everyone and begins recounting his experiences in outer space. He shares funny anecdotes between him and his brother, Tandy, where Tandy once had the nickname Skid Mark because he had a stain in his underwear. Hearing the story, everyone laughs hysterically while Tandy tries to contain his embarrassment. The next day, as Mike continues sharing his space experiences, he suddenly gets an idea to organize a bonfire event to welcome his arrival. With enthusiasm, he invites everyone and prepares the necessary items for the event later that evening. While everyone is preparing for the event, Gail takes the opportunity to talk to Melissa about Todd. She apologizes to Gail for not knowing that the relationship between Todd and Melissa had improved. However, Melissa understands, and they resolve the issue. In the evening, the bonfire event begins with Mike lighting the torch using a fire arrow. The event becomes lively when Mike sings a special song that holds meaning for him. The song tells about him and his colleague working in outer space. However, in the middle of singing, Mike suddenly stops as he continues to remember his deceased colleague. To prevent Mike from feeling sad, everyone approaches and hugs him, not wanting to be outdone by Mike. The next day, Tandy suddenly invites everyone to attend a concert he will hold at 6.00. He prepares some special songs he composed himself. The scene jumps to 6.00, where Tandy eagerly waits for his friends to arrive. After waiting for 3 hours, he finally sees Mike and others who want to watch Tandy's concert. With everyone present, Tandy immediately starts his concert, which turns out to be very painful for everyone's ears. Even Mike mocks and jokes about Tandy's performance, which angers Tandy. He brings up Mike's choice to escape to outer space to avoid family arguments. Embarrassed by Tandy's words, Mike decides to leave the theater immediately. As Mike leaves, everyone decides to follow his lead. After the event ends, as Tandy is about to sleep, Carol gives him a little advice. She wants Tandy to apologize to Mike for what he said, especially since Mike is Tandy's biological brother. Understanding Carol's advice, Tandy promises to apologize to Mike the next day. The next morning, Tandy wakes up and enthusiastically prepares himself to apologize to Mike. However, when he looks in the mirror, he suddenly feels angry with Mike and approaches him while he is chatting with others. When people look at Tandy, everyone spontaneously laughs because it turns out Mike played a prank on Tandy. Mike shaved off half of Tandy's hair and beard, making Tandy's appearance even more comical. After what Mike did to him, Tandy wants Mike to clarify what he did to him. With pleasure, Mike explains that he intentionally shaved Tandy's hair and beard, which made him happy. Not wanting to appear rough in front of everyone, Tandy reluctantly yields and even thanks Mike for shaving him. When Tandy leaves, everyone resumes laughing. Seeking revenge on Mike that night, Mike sets a trap for him. But as Tandy is about to set up the trap, he suddenly sees a large gift, a request from Mike. Initially skeptical, Tandy checks the gift and finds nothing suspicious. Eventually, Tandy agrees to open the gift, which turns out to contain money. However, it's a hoax because as Tandy opens the gift, he suddenly gets splattered with an unremovable liquid. The next day, Tandy's appearance becomes even stranger with his half-shaved hair and now green skin, which terrifies everyone. That night, Tandy intends to retaliate against Mike for what he did to him. He follows Mike home wearing a disguise cloak he owns. However, as Tandy is about to set the trap, he is caught by Mike's security system. Instantly, Tandy is caught red-handed. Tandy tries to justify it as a neighborhood watch program, but Mike doesn't believe him, especially when Tandy brings a knife. Eventually, Mike orders Tandy to rub the object on his body, suspecting it's a poisonous oak. Wanting to prove he isn't carrying anything, Tandy reluctantly rubs the object and soon passes out. In the morning, Tandy wakes up on a rock near the beach. As he wakes up, he accidentally falls off, panicking as he thinks he's falling off a cliff. Looking around, he sees Mike pointing at him. Fed up with Mike's continuous teasing, Tandy asks Todd for help in confronting Mike. Initially reluctant due to his busy schedule, Todd agrees after seeing Tandy's condition. Todd's first action is to mimic Tandy's hair, shaving one side to match Tandy's. After Todd does this, he approaches Mike and claims to be Tandy's friend. Seeing Todd with the same hairstyle as Tandy, Mike concedes that Tandy wins this round, believing Tandy wouldn't involve anyone else in their mischief. Mike then leaves, and Todd congratulates Tandy for being free from Mike's pranks. However, Tandy remains wary of Mike's every move. That night, Tandy gets help from Carol, who suggests a prank on Mike. She advises Tandy to write a letter claiming to be from Mike's mother. Tandy complies and gives the letter to Mike, who, upon reading it, feels sad and nostalgic about his parents but realizes it's a fake letter created by Tandy. Mike doesn't find it amusing as he genuinely misses his mother now. He leaves Tandy with a sour expression. Feeling guilty, Tandy retrieves some childhood photos of him and Mike. He decides to give Mike the Real letter from their mother along with a childhood photo of them together. Tandy apologizes to Mike for going too far. Mike quickly reads the letter and sees the childhood photo, and they decide to make peace and call a truce. However, as they reconcile, when Tandy is about to leave, he falls for another trap set by Mike. As Tandy opens Mike's door, a bucket full of flour falls and spills all over Tandy's face. Unable to say anything, Tandy can only raise his finger. The scene shifts to Carol approaching Todd for help after hearing a speech from Todd, where he vowed to give 100% of himself to help everyone. Todd gladly agrees to help Carol wholeheartedly, but his expression changes when Carol's request for help turns out to be quite unusual. She wants Todd to impregnate her. The scene begins with Carol having just finished her painting, which she immediately shows to Tandy. Upon seeing the painting, Tandy feels strange because the baby Carol painted looks like Todd. It turns out that Carol's intention in painting the picture is to ask for permission from Tandy. Finally, Carol explains that she still has a chance to conceive by asking Todd for his donation. Upon hearing Carol's request, Tandy agrees to it, thinking it's a good idea as long as it's just donation. But Carol explains that it won't be just donation but also intercourse, as she believes it's the most effective way to conceive quickly using the old-fashioned method. Initially, Tandy refuses, but when Carol insists it's the only way, Tandy agrees, and they proceed to get married. Just before the wedding begins, Tandy, acting as the officiant, suddenly decides that it should be Mike who donates his sperm to Carol. This surprises Mike, while Todd is confused but agrees to step aside for Mike. Mike replaces Todd and marries Carol. That night, everyone enjoys the wedding party, but Tandy feels uneasy about Todd. Later, Tandy approaches Todd, who is dancing alone, and asks if they're okay, thinking Todd is dancing to release his anger. Todd reassures Tandy that they're fine, and Tandy leaves him to continue dancing. On Mike and Carol's wedding night, it's actually Tandy who prepares everything, setting up a romantic room with candles. Initially, Mike and Carol have their own plans but ultimately follow Tandy's plan. However, when Mike and Carol are about to proceed, Tandy stays in the room, explaining that she wants to witness the process without interference or objections. Initially feeling awkward, Mike agrees to proceed in front of his sibling. The next day, as everyone gathers, Carol intends to check her ovulation period with the help of Melissa and Erica. Meanwhile, Todd, who has shaved his head, attracts attention. Tandy tries to talk to him, but Todd declines and walks away. Carol, instead of checking her ovulation, uses a pregnancy test with Melissa and Erica's help. They are surprised when the test confirms that Carol is pregnant. Everyone is happy, especially Tandy, who thanks Mike for his help in conceiving. Mike declines the thanks, feeling it's too soon for him to have a child. When Mike reveals that the child Carol is carrying is Tandy's, Tandy is overjoyed and hugs Carol tightly. The final scene shows Gail enjoying her wine when she suddenly sees a sophisticated flying object monitoring her. The scene begins with Gail immediately approaching everyone after seeing the strange object, telling them that someone is monitoring them. She explains seeing a flying object resembling a women's hairdryer, finding it odd. However, everyone doubts Gail's words, assuming she's drunk and hallucinating due to too much wine. Not wanting to lie, Gail promptly invites everyone outside, but she can't prove her claim as the sophisticated object she saw has disappeared. Unable to substantiate her testimony, everyone leaves to tend to their own business. Mike and Erica, for instance, start communicating well, as they both spent time in Adelaide. However, Erica's story differs, as during her time in Adelaide, she wasn't on vacation or attending school. Instead, she was in jail due to involvement in a robbery and was caught holding a weapon. Their conversation continues, with Mike becoming Erica's personal chef, impressing her with his culinary skills. Erica even nicknames him Chef Miyagi. The scene shifts to Tandy approaching Mike, who is milking a cow, asking him to be the godfather to his future child. Mike gladly accepts. Todd suddenly arrives and berates Mike. Unhappy with Todd's behavior, Tandy tells Todd that Mike is his brother. However, Todd is jealous of Tandy's closeness to his sibling, feeling lonely himself. As the argument ensues, it abruptly stops when Todd notices Mike coughing up blood, not wanting Phil's fate to repeat. Tandy quickly covers it up from everyone. However, Todd reveals the truth that he saw Mike coughing up blood, making them fear Mike might have a virus that wiped out most of humanity. They decide to leave Mike alone, fearing the virus, especially since Erica and Carol are pregnant. However, Tandy reassures everyone that Mike is just catching a cold and comes up with a plan to address the issue. That night, Tandy approaches Mike wearing protective gear, inviting him to join the others who are also wearing the same gear. They introduce a bunker they created to isolate Mike for safety. Mike doesn't mind, understanding people's fear of the virus. They decide to play a guessing game, trying to guess the names of those who died from the virus, involving Mike in the game. However, the warm night turns cold when someone surprises them with news that their only adult cow has died. Everyone rushes to the cow pen and discovers the truth, strengthening their reasons to isolate Mike. They cannot believe their cow suddenly died, especially knowing that Mike coughed up blood while milking. They all rush to isolate Mike, but Tandy insists on letting Mike stay with his sibling. Reluctantly, everyone leaves except Tandy, who stays with his sibling. They sleep together with a plastic barrier separating them. Before falling asleep, they decide to sing their favorite song from the past. The next morning, when Tandy wakes up, he doesn't find Mike beside him and discovers a farewell letter from Mike, who decided to leave. After seeing his brother lying motionless with a pale face, Tandy panicked. But as he approached, Mike suddenly rose, startling Tandy, realizing it was Mike's plan. The scene shifts to the Tucson family deciding to care for their only remaining cow. While feeding the calf, they are startled to see the strange flying object again, beginning to believe Gail's words. Returning to Tandy and Mike, they spend time tinkering with Mike's belongings brought from space. However, their happiness is interrupted when Mike suddenly faints. Now, back to the Tucson family, they hastily grab boxes painted with words signifying their goodness. However, when they try to be friendly, Melissa shoots the object, suspecting it's being controlled to spy on them. The scene returns to Mike, who wakes up from fainting, sees Tandy beside him coughing up blood, just like Mike when he coughs. This makes Mike panic, thinking Tandy's infected, but Tandy laughs, revealing it was just a prank with chili sauce. Not finding it funny, Mike asks Tandy to stop, who then asks Mike to shave his head, which Mike does happily, restoring Tandy's appearance. Mike then urges Tandy to go home and think about Carol, but Tandy refuses until Mike angers him with hurtful words. Feeling guilty, Mike apologizes and notices a grave outside, which is their parents' grave. Touched by Tandy's gesture, Mike thanks him for burying their parents properly, as Tandy even made a grave for Mike, thinking he was dead. Grateful, Mike asks Tandy to return home, where Tandy agrees after Mike's apology. The next day, Tandy returns to Malibu, giving Mike his cherished ball collection, asking Mike to take care of them. Back in Malibu, Gail discovers a cruise ship landing near their beach. Through a telescope, Tandy sees 3 people in protective gear with weapons approaching their home. Like, comment, and subscribe so I will soon make a recap for The Last Man on Earth. Thank you for watching. Feeling panicked when the 3 strangers arrived, Tandy only heightened everyone's anxiety by claiming that the newcomers were armed and heading towards them. Consequently, everyone scattered, trying to save themselves, but Carol instead went to rescue Melissa, who was being restrained. Rather than fleeing, Melissa grabbed a weapon, intending to confront the strangers, while the others hurried to the car to escape. Their plan to drive away failed when Todd lost the car keys, forcing them to hide inside the house. When the 3 mysterious people arrived and began searching the house, Todd finally found the car keys and attempted to retrieve them. However, when he touched a plastic doll attached to the keys, the doll made a noise, revealing Todd's location to the strangers and startling him. Realizing Todd's presence, everyone rushed out and confronted the 3 strangers, with Melissa wielding a shotgun and threatening to shoot if they made any wrong moves. True to her word, when one of the strangers moved, Melissa shot him. The injured stranger then revealed that they had no intention of shooting anyone and had come in peace. Shortly afterward, Daryl, the wounded stranger, succumbed to his injuries, as confirmed by his companion, Lewis. The three strangers turned out to be extremely cautious about the virus, which explained their protective gear. Now, only Lewis and Pat Brown remained, the latter previously known for traveling with Mike. After burying their fallen companion, Lewis and Pat asked for permission to stay temporarily in Malibu. Initially, everyone refused, but Tandy convinced them to reconsider, pointing out that the two men were harmless and that they had killed one of their own. Eventually, they agreed to provide shelter, and Tandy introduced them to their new home. During the tour, Pat abruptly stopped Lewis, hinting that this was a good beginning for them, suggesting they had a sinister plan against the Tucson family. Despite this, Tandy and Pat grew closer, engaging in activities that strengthened their friendship, such as crafting fake eyebrows for Tandy. When Tandy showed off Pat's creation, Gail and Erica found the eyebrows odd, which angered Pat as he felt unappreciated. Tandy, however, managed to calm him down. Suspicious of Pat's behavior, everyone except Tandy questioned Lewis about Pat's true nature. Initially, Lewis described Pat as a special, kind person, but under pressure, he confessed that Pat was actually a deranged individual who terrorized others. He recounted how Pat had once shown him corpses of virus victims, revealing that Melissa had mistakenly shot the wrong person. While the group learned about Pat's true nature, Tandy and Pat were bonding over setting a pier on fire and launching rockets, reminiscing about their shared connection with Mike. Upon returning home, Tandy was warned by the others to distance himself from Pat and isolate him. Just as they voiced their concerns, Pat arrived without his protective gear to thank everyone for accepting him. As a token of gratitude, he presented Gail with painted jeans. Approaching Gail, Pat noticed a photo of Mike with Tandy and felt deceived. He then drew a gun, pointing it at everyone, especially Tandy, and asked, "Head or heart?" Paralyzed with fear, Tandy didn't respond. When Pat attempted to shoot, his gun malfunctioned. Seizing the opportunity, everyone piled into the car to flee, but Pat, after reloading, blocked their path. Fortunately, he was too late, and the car rammed into him as they made their escape. After hitting Pat with the car, the group quickly searched for a new place to hide. Lewis mentioned that they should hope Pat was dead because if he survived, he would definitely come after them. To confirm whether Pat was dead or alive, Tandy decided to return to Malibu to check on him. While hiding from Pat, Tandy discovered Pat lying on the ground. When Tandy checked Pat's condition, he found that Pat was indeed dead, so he buried him properly. The next day, Tandy announced what he had found the previous night. Pat had been declared dead. This news relieved everyone, as they were free from the threat, except for Todd, who cried because he couldn't believe he had killed someone. To alleviate Todd's guilt, Tandy lied, saying Pat was still alive, but claimed he had said Pat was dead only to keep everyone safe. Upon hearing Tandy's words, Todd stopped crying and no longer felt guilty. The two then returned to Malibu to determine whether Pat was truly alive or not. Upon arrival, they found several writings by Pat, most of which were threats. They also discovered incense lit by Pat and jeans recently painted by him. They then announced to everyone that Pat was still alive but had left, making them feel safe enough to return to Malibu. However, Tandy privately told Carol that Pat was indeed dead. He lied to prevent Todd from feeling guilty about killing Pat. To prevent his lie from being exposed, Tandy and Carol devised a plan. Carol gathered everyone while Tandy staged a dramatic reenactment of killing Pat using a foam dummy. Carol narrated a story about Tandy killing Pat brutally. After the performance, Tandy hoped everyone believed that he, not Todd, had killed Pat. However, their plan failed when Lewis discovered the ruse and demanded the truth from Tandy. Confused, Tandy reluctantly admitted that Pat was dead and that he had seen it with his own eyes. Hearing Tandy's explanation, Todd again felt guilty about hitting and killing Pat. This time, Tandy comforted Todd, telling him he was a hero for saving everyone from the threat. Tandy hugged Todd, and everyone followed suit. Feeling safe again, they decided to return to Malibu. Upon arrival, Carol asked Tandy how he disposed of Pat's body. Realizing he hadn't done so, Tandy quickly went to the spot where he had buried Pat, only to find the body missing. As they were puzzled by Pat's missing body, Carol discovered a trail of blood leading toward the beach. She believed it belonged to Pat. They went to the beach and began to suspect that Pat had managed to escape. However, Todd was worried that if Pat returned to Malibu, he might bring new weapons to target them. Due to concerns about Pat's possible return, Tandy created an alarm that would automatically activate if Pat passed by. He tested the alarm on Carol, and it worked well. Meanwhile, Melissa built a barricade out of sand piles to use as a shelter in case Pat returned. However, the barricade startled several people, including Lewis, who was suddenly held at gunpoint by Melissa. Melissa explained that the barricade was for her protection and to help her anticipate Pat's movements. She demonstrated its use with Erica, who walked past her barricade. That evening, during dinner, Tandy demonstrated how they should fight Pat if he returned. He asked Lewis to volunteer, and Lewis pretended to be Pat attacking him. However, when Lewis approached, Tandy activated a stun gun, paralyzing Lewis. After the demonstration, Tandy and Carol returned to their room, where Carol showed him a cloak they could use for disguising themselves to avoid Pat. Tandy praised Carol's good idea, but worried that Lewis might be angry with him for the stun gun incident. Carol suggested that if Tandy didn't want to upset Lewis, he should approach him and ask to be friends. As everyone was about to sleep, they suddenly heard the alarm and gathered to find out who triggered it. When Melissa was ready, they discovered that it was Carol, who felt nauseous. The next day, Tandy implemented Carol's idea and approached Lewis to be friends. They met at the beach, where Tandy began with small talk and told a story about a lion and a mouse. After some time, Tandy asked Lewis to be his friend. Lewis agreed without mentioning the previous night's incident. Once Lewis agreed to be friends, they played catch. However, when Tandy threw the ball too far, it triggered a landmine Melissa had set up. Melissa explained that she had placed several landmines to detect Pat if he returned. That night, as everyone was about to sleep, the alarm went off again, followed by gunshots, causing panic. There was no one at the alarm, which made everyone more anxious, fearing for their lives. Lewis calmed everyone, explaining that the alarm was triggered by the tide, which set off a landmine, causing the car alarm to go off and, in turn, the house alarm. He assured everyone there was no immediate danger. Not wanting to live in constant fear of Pat, Lewis decided to leave Malibu the next day, and everyone agreed to follow him. Tandy reluctantly agreed to leave the house filled with memories. Before leaving, everyone said goodbye to their cherished items. Tandy bid farewell to his alarm, Carol to her paintings, and Gail to a doll she had dressed up to look like Gordon. Once they were ready, they got into their cars and left, uncertain of their next destination. After a long journey, Tandy Miller and his companions appeared happy, except for Gail, who had fallen asleep in her self-driving car. When she woke up, her car had stopped at a gas station because Lewis's car had broken down. Gail got out, forgetting to disable the autopilot, causing her car to drive off on its own. The men attempted to repair Lewis's car, but none were as skilled as Phil. Unable to fix it, they decided to abandon the car. That night, they rested at the gas station, eating the remaining supplies and deciding their next destination. Gail suggested San Francisco, and with Lewis's support, they agreed to go there. Everyone was excited about San Francisco, especially with Tandy making the journey lively. However, when they arrived, they found the city completely burned down. The scene shifted to 2 years earlier, revealing that the fire was caused by Tandy's antics. With San Francisco uninhabitable, they set off again into the unknown. During the journey, Erica and Carol argued about using the air conditioning. Eventually, Erica relented and let Carol use it. Suddenly, their car broke down with smoke billowing from the hood. They decided to abandon the car, and Tandy suggested everyone hitch a ride with someone else. Everyone piled into Todd's car, but it too broke down shortly after. They continued their journey on a city bus driven by Tandy. Tandy tried to cheer everyone up by singing, but it only annoyed them. Then, disaster struck again when the bus ran out of gas because Tandy forgot to refuel it. With no other vehicle available, they had to walk. As they walked, they saw Gail's car still driving aimlessly. They continued their journey until Lewis found a hardware store that could serve as a temporary shelter. That night, they voted on their next destination. One vote for Tampa, one for Vancouver, and one for Portland, which Lewis thought would have plenty of food supplies. Frustrated with the constant debates, Gail decided to head to Napa alone. Todd tried to stop her, not wanting her to leave. As Gail was about to go, they saw Melissa standing on a haystack. Melissa urged Todd to climb up and see what she had found. When Todd climbed up, he shouted for everyone to join him. To their amazement, they saw a large office building with lights on. They decided to approach the building and try to enter. As soon as they stepped in front of the entrance, they felt the cool air conditioning. They began to explore, taking the elevator up and searching for a suitable place to stay. Upon exiting the elevator, they found a paradise-like space filled with futuristic furniture, including refrigerators and freezers. Tandy even found some frozen pizza he couldn't wait to eat. There were also functional toilets. Without much debate or voting, they decided to stay in the building. The next morning, everyone woke up, except for Tandy, who had been playing with a toy car all night. He informed his friends that he had explored the entire building, which had 5 floors. He suggested that everyone should occupy the vacant floors. Erica took the 2nd floor, Lewis the 3rd, and Gail the 4th. Initially, Todd wanted to join Gail, but she refused, so Todd and Melissa chose another floor together. Once the floors were chosen, they began using the building's electricity. Todd heated up pizza, while Gail made juice from the office supplies. However, just as the pizza was about to be ready, the power suddenly went out. The next day, Tandy looked for the building's power source to fix the electricity, while Todd used the building's water alarm system as a shower. While Todd was showering, Gail approached him to clarify things. She didn't want any issues with anyone, so she decided to end her relationship with Todd. Without saying much, she bid him farewell. When Tandy managed to fix the electricity, everyone suddenly heard something fall, which almost hit Carol. Tandy quickly secured Carol and tried to figure out who did it. Finding a wrench as evidence, Tandy immediately suspected Lewis and interrogated him. Lewis denied any involvement. The scene shifted to Todd, who, after breaking up with Gail, went to Melissa to talk about what had happened. Initially, Melissa was indifferent, but seeing Todd's sad face, she sympathized and agreed to be with him again, even ready to have a child together. This news cheered Todd up. Tandy's suspicions of Lewis didn't stop there. One night, while Lewis was using the bathroom, Tandy suddenly appeared, startling Lewis. Lewis, confused, told Tandy to leave. The next day, while Tandy and Todd were using the water alarm system to shower, the water suddenly stopped. Tandy immediately knew who was responsible and went to confront Lewis, still wrapped in a towel. Lewis again denied any wrongdoing. Eventually, Carol confessed that she had done it. She admitted to causing the disruptions because she didn't feel the building was their home and wanted everyone to leave. Tandy apologized and promised to create a comfortable place for Carol. Feeling guilty for her actions, Carol requested to be punished. She was mockingly sentenced to beheaded. During the mock execution, Tandy gave Carol a small model of her dream house. Tandy wanted to apologize to Lewis for having suspected him and to mend their friendship. To do so, he decided to create a song based on Lewis's love story. Lewis shared that his girlfriend's zodiac sign was Pisces. They lived in Seattle, and the last time he saw her was before she flew to Tokyo. After gathering some details, Tandy performed his song, which unfortunately bored Lewis immensely. Despite this, Tandy persisted in following Lewis around, trying to win his favor. Meanwhile, Carol was similarly persistent, but her focus was on convincing Gail to be a grandmother to her future children. Gail, enjoying her ice cream, firmly refused. Back with Tandy, he eventually discovered what Lewis's girlfriend looked like. He told Lewis he had a small surprise for him. However, Lewis, who already knew what Tandy was up to, insisted he would never return to Seattle and shut the door on him. Tandy's repeated attempts to approach Lewis were met with rejection, even when Carol tried to help. Ultimately, Tandy resorted to using a stun gun to incapacitate Lewis and take him on a trip against his will. During the journey, Lewis lamented that Tandy shouldn't have done this, as he was convinced his boyfriend, Mark, was dead. Tandy argued that miracles happen, citing his own reunion with a sibling he thought was dead. After a long trip, they arrived at Lewis's former home. Tandy encouraged Lewis to leave a note for Mark, hoping he might read it. Entering the house, Lewis was flooded with memories of Mark as he saw their photos together. While Lewis was lost in his emotions, Tandy suddenly appeared, much to Lewis's annoyance, and he asked Tandy to leave. Tandy, however, refused to go. The scene shifted to Carol, who was still trying to persuade Gail to be her children's grandmother. This time, Carol presented a script for a play in which Gail would play her mother. Carol wanted Gail to sign a contract to formalize this arrangement. Gail firmly refused and said something that hurt Carol deeply. The scene then moved to Todd and Melissa, who were discussing having children. Todd, sensing something off about Melissa, declined and pointed out that she had changed. Melissa indeed was acting unpredictably, and after Todd refused to have children, she revealed a large hole she had dug behind a poster. Back with Lewis, the next morning, he prepared to return to the Tucson family. Before leaving, Lewis followed Tandy's advice and left a note for Mark. They then set off, but Tandy insisted on making one last stop. Carol, in the meantime, continued her relentless campaign to get Gail to sign the contract. Gail, exhausted by Carol's persistence, finally gave in and agreed to be Carol's mother. Tandy's final destination turned out to be Tucson, where he returned to his house to retrieve his last friend, a volleyball, after Mike had died from the virus. Tandy left with a heavy heart, still mourning his brother. Lewis tried to console Tandy, and they decided to head back together. After officially becoming Gail's daughter, Carol immediately dressed up in an outfit she had designed for a family photo and invited Gail for the picture. She also included Tandy, who wore the same outfit. However, Gail declined, finding Carol's attire strange. When Gail left, Tandy and Carol stayed in their little house. Shortly after, they had a visitor. Lewis came by to thank Tandy. He expressed gratitude for Tandy's efforts, which had motivated him. Tandy hugged Lewis and encouraged him to stay positive. The scene then shifted to Todd, who tried to reconnect with Melissa. However, Melissa became increasingly strange. She acted as though she was carrying a baby, and when Todd tried to joke with her, she admitted the baby wasn't real but continued talking to it. Melissa then told Todd that if he wasn't going to give her a child, he should leave. Confused by Melissa's behavior, Todd decided to walk away. Meanwhile, Lewis went to the airport to find a plane. Back to the family scene, Carol and Tandy didn't give up on convincing Gail to take a family photo. This time, they dressed in the same style as Gail. Despite wearing matching outfits, Gail still refused to participate, keeping her eyes closed when Tandy took the picture. She eventually slipped away and entered an elevator. Lewis, on the other hand, found a plane and was seen flying it. However, mid-flight, he lost control and the plane crashed. It turned out the plane was a simulator that Lewis was using to practice flying. The scene then shifted back to Todd, who shared Melissa's odd behavior with Tandy. He noted that Melissa was very different from when he first met her. Curious, Tandy approached Melissa, who indeed had changed. She suddenly asked Tandy to take off his pants and make a baby with her. Tandy, respecting his friendship with Todd, refused, and Melissa angrily drove him away. Wanting to escape Carol's constant antics, Gail decided to leave the building. She took some drinks from the supermarket and went to a quiet, neighboring building. Gail took an elevator to reach the top floor to relax. However, as soon as she reached the 5th floor, the elevator suddenly stopped and the power went out, similar to the outage at Tandy's building. But unlike Gail, the power at Tandy's building was restored thanks to Lewis's help. Gail, now trapped in the elevator, played her accordion, hoping someone would come to rescue her. At this moment, everyone was shocked by a note in Melissa's room that read "Goodbye," indicating that Melissa had decided to live alone and distance herself from the group. Worried about Melissa's condition, Todd insisted on searching for her everywhere, vowing not to return until he found her. The search began while Gail continued to wait for a miracle to rescue her. As she was lost in thought, Gail suddenly heard a car horn from the vehicle Tandy was driving. She tried to shout and call for help, but Tandy was too far from the building where Gail was trapped. Tandy and Carol then decided to join the search for Melissa, unaware that Gail was missing. Despite searching everywhere, the team couldn't find Melissa. Todd persisted in his search, even when his friends decided to return. Meanwhile, inside the elevator, Gail struggled to open the doors to escape. No matter how hard she tried, the doors wouldn't budge. While Erica and Lewis were creating a map to continue the search for Melissa, Tandy arrived dressed in a dinosaur costume, hoping to scare them. However, Erica and Lewis spotted him immediately and greeted him calmly. Feeling his attempt was a failure, Tandy made small talk about their efforts to find Melissa. As Lewis was explaining, Todd suddenly arrived and was terrified at the sight of Tandy in the dinosaur costume. He screamed and tried to run, but Tandy chased him, making Todd even more frightened. When Todd had nowhere to go, Tandy revealed it was just a costume. Realizing this, Todd felt relieved. They continued their search for Melissa from morning until night, without any success. Exhausted, Todd fell asleep in the cold night air. While Todd slept, Tandy tried to wake him up and suggest they go home. When Tandy finally managed to wake him, Todd again got scared by the dinosaur costume. Once he realized it was just a costume, Todd got into his car and resumed his search for Melissa. The next day, as Todd was cleaning up, Tandy came to comfort him. In the midst of Tandy's consolations, Todd suddenly remembered where Melissa might have gone: a prison uniform shop in Zihuatanejo. He quickly set off for the town to find her. Meanwhile, Gail was still trying to open the elevator doors, using a mannequin head of Gordon to pry them open. Her efforts initially seemed futile as the elevator became more damaged and dark. However, the saying, "effort never betrays results," held true for Gail. After working tirelessly, she managed to open the elevator doors, though she still had to lift the elevator one floor to get out. While the Tucson group searched for Melissa, they checked several shops but found no sign of her until they saw a parked car. They approached the car, raising Gail's hopes as she heard footsteps. She fired a pistol she had, which caught the Tucson group's attention, and they headed towards the building where Gail was trapped. As they were about to enter the building, Melissa suddenly appeared, looking innocent. With Melissa found, they decided not to enter the building. Todd asked why Melissa had fired the gun she was holding. Melissa replied that she hadn't used her gun. Todd then persuaded Melissa to put down her weapon, and they left together. Just before leaving, Tandy felt something was off, convinced the gunshot came from inside. Gail's situation worsened as everyone decided to return to their building, leaving her still trapped in the elevator. Upon Melissa's return home, she was immediately interrogated by everyone. However, Melissa's answers never matched the questions asked, increasing everyone's concern and prompting them to decide to keep her in a locked room with two-way glass for constant observation. Todd, disagreeing with this approach, was convinced that Melissa was still a normal person and promised to stay by her side regardless of her condition. After spending the entire day with Melissa, Todd tucked her into bed and stood guard outside to ensure she didn't leave during the night. But in the morning, Todd woke up to find Melissa's room open and panicked. He approached Erica and Lewis, who were using a flight simulator, to inquire about Melissa's whereabouts. Not wanting to alarm anyone, Todd claimed he knew where Melissa was and assured them she would be fine. Meanwhile, Tandy and Carol organized a special event for themselves, reminiscing about their first meeting with camping gear. This nostalgic setup brought back memories of how Carol and Tandy had first met. After their trip down memory lane, Tandy invited Carol to go fishing, hoping for another magical moment. While Carol fished, Tandy decided to swim. Afterward, Tandy suddenly announced that the fishing line felt heavy, but when he reeled it in, it was just a woman's clothing item of unknown origin. Determined, Tandy dove back into the water. A miracle happened when Carol felt her line grow heavy. Initially suspecting Tandy was behind it, Carol soon realized he wasn't. The weight on the line turned out to be a fish, which they never expected to catch. The scene then shifted to Gail, who captured a robotic vacuum cleaner, hoping to use it to send a message. She wrote a note, but the robot dropped and then swallowed it before continuing on its way, frustrating Gail. In desperation, Gail fired her gun at the elevator ceiling, but the bullet ricocheted and injured her wrist, causing her to bleed. The scene returned to Lewis and Erica, informing Todd that Melissa was missing. Todd reassured them she was fine, but their relief was short-lived when they saw Melissa standing at the edge of a building. Fearing she might jump, they rushed to her, pleading with her to step away from the edge. Melissa, seemingly unaware of her actions, was eventually coaxed down by Todd, who then took her for a walk. Meanwhile, Tandy and Carol were thrilled with their big catch. Carol, guessing the fish was female, named it Gale, missing the real Gale after their previous conflict. Back with Todd and Melissa, instead of a walk, Todd placed Melissa in a specially designed room. After ensuring she was settled, Todd locked the door and cried outside, heartbroken by Melissa's treatment. That night, as Tandy and Carol checked on their fish, they found it lifeless on the ground. Tandy tried various methods to revive it, including mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but the fish was declared dead. Tandy prepared a proper burial, but just as he was about to bury it, the fish started moving again, bringing immense joy to Tandy and Carol. In a different building, Gale had resigned herself to her fate, convinced she would die there. Todd, on the other hand, continued to cry over Melissa, who repeatedly begged him to unlock her door. Refusing to repeat past mistakes, Todd did not comply. Meanwhile, Erica and Lewis enjoyed their flight simulator game, oblivious to the chaos around them. Tandy and Carol, satisfied with their camping experience, decided to rejoin the group, concluding another day in their unpredictable lives. The scene in this episode is somewhat different, as it flashes back to the initial outbreak of the virus that spread worldwide. It begins with an event attended by several important American officials. They are gathered, chatting, and giving speeches. However, the situation changes abruptly when one of them suddenly starts coughing up blood, has a nosebleed, and collapses. Initially, Pamela, the woman giving a speech, thinks it's a joke. However, the next day, while driving, she notices everyone wearing masks. Interestingly, this series depicts a virus spreading in 2020, while COVID-19 also emerged globally in 2020. Is this a conspiracy? Moving on, fearing that the virus might infect her, Pamela immediately closes the partition between her and her driver, especially after seeing her driver coughing. When she arrives home, Pamela recounts what she witnessed and suggests to her husband that they initiate vaccinations. However, Pamela's husband refuses, believing that humans no longer need vaccines. As days pass, the virus ravages America, leading to the closure of all stores and the disappearance of people from the streets. Needing food supplies, Pamela decides to go to the supermarket. There, she unexpectedly meets Catherine, the one person she frequently talks about, envies, and hates. They make small talk about their respective conditions before Pamela leaves, and Catherine is seen eating dog food. The next morning, Pamela wakes up to find her husband, Benjamin, missing but discovers bloodstains on his pillow. Worried, she searches and finds Benjamin in an isolation room. Benjamin urges Pamela to stay away from him to avoid infection. Initially, Pamela refuses because she doesn't want Benjamin to suffer alone, but she eventually leaves him for her own safety. Pamela then goes to Catherine's house, only to find her dead. She takes Catherine's house keys from the basement and starts living there with her small dog, the only companion she has left. However, having only the dog for company doesn't help Pamela. After 2 years, she becomes bored and begins hallucinating, trying to make her dog talk to have a friend, but to no avail. One day, after cleaning herself, Pamela finds her dress torn and some items broken. Believing her dog is responsible, she angrily drives it away, and the dog never returns. Now completely alone, Pamela becomes increasingly lonely, stressed, and frustrated. The house falls into disrepair as she can't manage it. Her days are consumed by drinking alcohol, eating, and daydreaming. Since the high-tech bunker that belonged to Christine has an advanced system, Pamela tries to locate other humans using a drone. While flying the drone over Malibu, she spots someone reading a book, who turns out to be Gale. This reveals that the drone Gale found earlier did not belong to Pat. Pamela attempts to communicate with Gale and the others, but when she sees the sign they write, her drone suddenly malfunctions and disappears. Determined, Pamela decides to leave the bunker and go to Malibu to find Gale and the others. Finally, we return to the Tucson family, who are increasingly worried about Melissa's condition. However, everyone is confident that Melissa can still recover. One by one, they try to communicate with her, but they are met only with mockery from Melissa. Eventually, they all give up as Melissa refuses to open up. After this method fails, Carol and Erica start researching possible mental health issues that Melissa might be experiencing. Meanwhile, Todd successfully installs a surveillance camera to better monitor Melissa's movements. The scene then shifts to Tandy visiting Lewis, who is practicing on a flight simulator. Tandy explains that he has something special for Lewis that will make him happy. He then takes Lewis to an airport, where Tandy presents him with a real airplane. Seeing a real plane, Lewis is reluctant to accept it, as he feels unprepared and has only practiced on a simulator. He doesn't want to risk flying a real plane. However, Tandy tries to convince Lewis that he is now skilled enough to fly. With Melissa sick and Erica and Carol busy researching her condition, and Todd faithfully staying by Melissa's side, the situation is dire. Hearing this, Lewis eventually agrees to learn to fly the actual plane. When Tandy announces that Lewis will be flying the plane, everyone gets excited, hoping that Lewis will discover something beneficial for them. The next day, Carol creates a newspaper featuring Lewis the pilot. After rigorous practice, Lewis finally flies the plane, and everyone cheers as he successfully takes off. However, the flight doesn't last long. After just a few miles, the plane plummets to the ground and explodes. Lewis is declared dead, and the Tucson family is devastated by the loss of their new friend. The funeral is an emotional affair, with several people offering their praises for Lewis. After his death, Tandy feels increasingly lonely since he no longer has a male friend besides Todd, who is preoccupied with caring for Melissa. In his loneliness, Tandy goes to a church wearing his dinosaur costume and starts talking to God. He prays for guidance to lead his friends. Suddenly, Tandy receives an idea and decides to put it into action. He prepares an elaborate plan to attract everyone's interest. When the others see Tandy's creation, it turns out to be a light show forming a rainbow. Tandy explains that he created this show to honor Lewis's memory. However, finding it uninteresting, everyone decides to ignore Tandy's efforts. The scene begins with someone struggling up a staircase, step by step, and passing through several buildings. It turns out to be Gail, who has finally escaped after being trapped in the elevator for so long. When Gail arrives, the first person she encounters is Tandy. However, Tandy doesn't show any suspicion about Gail, who has been missing for a while. He assumes Gail is just exhausted from being alone in Napa, as she had planned. Tandy then directs Gail to the dining room where everyone is gathered. Upon entering, Gail is warmly welcomed by Erica and Carol. However, after taking just a few steps, Gail suddenly collapses, prompting everyone to rush to her aid, including Tandy, who tries to give her some water. Once Gail regains consciousness, she explains that she didn't go to Napa but was instead trapped in the elevator of the neighboring building for 10 days. She reveals that the injury on her knee was self-inflicted out of frustration when she fired her gun, and the bullet ricocheted back at her. Feeling sympathetic and concerned, Erica and Carol take care of Gail, with Carol even offering her own place for Gail to rest. The scene then shifts to Tandy, who decides to play a game of bowling in the living room. While Tandy is enjoying himself, Todd arrives and announces that he has figured out Melissa's problem. He has discovered that Melissa's hometown is a place called Akron, and Todd believes the only way to help Melissa is to take her there. Tandy agrees, thinking it's a good idea, and they immediately set off for Melissa's birthplace in Akron. Arriving there at night, Tandy and Todd begin searching for clues about Melissa's home. However, they mistakenly end up at the house of an African-American family, thinking it was Melissa's family. When Todd asks Melissa to help find her actual home, she locks herself in a room and goes to sleep. The next morning, Todd wakes up Tandy in a panic, saying that Melissa is missing. They frantically search around Akron for her. On the street, they spot a large billboard with Melissa's face on it. Thanks to this billboard, they finally locate Melissa's Real house after searching through the office where she used to work. After obtaining several addresses, they quickly go there and find Melissa sound asleep in her old bedroom. The scene then shifts to Gail, who apologizes to Carol for her previous behavior and for being indifferent to her child. She confesses that while she was trapped in the elevator, she constantly thought about Carol, every gesture and every smile Carol gave. Gail admits that she now realizes Carol is someone she wants to be part of her family. Carol is overjoyed to hear that Gail finally sees her as a daughter. Carol quickly gets the idea to use the costume she once made for Gail for a family photo. Before the scene transitions back to Tandy and Todd, they express amazement at discovering that Melissa was a highly successful career woman, capable of doing various jobs, including skydiving and office work. While they are discussing Melissa, she unexpectedly comes down dressed exactly as she appeared on the billboard. Melissa greets Tandy and Todd and takes a pill, though she doesn't know its purpose. Realizing that Melissa hasn't fully returned to her normal self, Todd decides to take her back to the Tucson family. Meanwhile, Carol fulfills her dream of taking a family photo with Gail in the custom-made outfit. After setting up the camera, she embraces Gail, and they take a photo like mother and daughter. After the photo session, Carol quickly begins to sort through the pictures. However, her expression changes dramatically when she notices something disturbing. As she edits the family photos, she suddenly sees a creepy figure standing behind them. After noticing the strange figure in her family photos with Gail, Carol quickly gathers everyone and announces that she has seen a figure she believes is Yoda, a fictional character from Star Wars. Everyone is shocked and can't believe they might encounter such a creature. However, Tandy dismisses it as just a small tree among the bushes. His skepticism is silenced when Carol shows the photos, revealing the figure moving in each shot. With clear evidence of the mysterious figure, Carol, Tandy, and Erica quickly head to the spot where Carol and Gail had taken the photo. Disguised, Tandy leads the surveillance operation. While observing, Erica spots a house at the edge of the forest, which Tandy assumes is where Yoda resides. They proceed to raid the house, finding several cans of drinks, snacks, and children's toys. This convinces them that Yoda is actually a child. Carol discovers a drawing depicting her and Tandy fishing, leading her to believe the child has been watching them for some time. Despite several attempts to lure the child out of hiding, Tandy's efforts prove futile. He devises another plan, asking Erica and Carol to leave while loudly announcing their departure. On their way home, Tandy suddenly jumps out of the car, asking Carol to take over driving. His secret plan is to stay behind and observe, search, and bring the child back. Meanwhile, Todd helps Gail retrieve her accordion from the elevator. Inside, he is disturbed by the sight of blood stains, scattered bullets, and shattered glass. He quickly retrieves the accordion and also brings Gail's doll, Gordon, to keep her company. Back with Tandy, he tirelessly searches for the mysterious child from morning until night, shouting in the forest without success. Exhausted, he falls asleep in the quiet of the night. The next morning, Erica and Carol arrive with food for the child. However, Tandy instructs Carol to discard it, hoping it is unappealing, as he believes the child does not deserve their help. Carol is hurt by Tandy's words and leaves, while Erica expresses her anger at him. With no results, Tandy decides to go home. On the way back, he apologizes to Carol for his remarks and begins discussing the mysterious child. Suddenly, the creature from the family photo appears in the back of the car. When Tandy reaches for a lemon, he is startled by its presence and screams, causing everyone to panic. The encounter between the Tucson family and the mysterious child brings a sense of joy to the house. Initially, the child refuses to remove the Yoda mask. It isn't until Erica offers pizza that the child reveals his face, though he still remains silent despite others' attempts to communicate. Since the child won't share his name, everyone starts guessing. Gail suggests Smeagol, Carol guesses Daphne, and Tandy, noticing a Jansport label on the child's backpack, suggests the name Jansport. Eventually, they decide to call him Jasper. Tandy eagerly tries to bond with Jasper, starting with giving him a margarita pool, but Jasper remains indifferent. Even when Tandy offers his best friend, Gary, the volleyball, Jasper throws it away, resulting in Gary being run over by Erica's car. Determined to fix Gary, Tandy uses duct tape to patch him up and inflate him again. Carol advises Tandy on how to approach Jasper gently, suggesting techniques she saw in a movie. Tandy soon finds Jasper with a pack of cigarettes and, attempting to enforce rules, takes them away. Jasper leaves, but Tandy returns the cigarettes on the condition that Jasper follows his rules. During dinner, Tandy introduces the new, more obedient Jasper to everyone, demonstrating his compliance by having Jasper unfold his napkin and give Gail a kiss when complimented. However, the compliments turn to criticism when Carol notices a pile of cigarettes on Jasper's chair, revealing that Tandy had been bribing him with cigarettes. This leads to Jasper being separated from Tandy. In a meeting, Everyone votes on who will be Jasper's guardian. Tandy confidently expects to be chosen, offering Jasper a cigarette as a bribe, but Gale exposes his tactic. Consequently, Tandy is disqualified, and Jasper chooses Erica as his caretaker. Jasper seems happy with Erica, and Tandy, as a consolation, gives Erica a giant olive as a gift. Erica asks Tandy to say goodnight to Jasper, who is fast asleep, and Tandy retrieves Gary from Jasper's grasp. The scene shifts to Jasper watching an adult video, which Carol quickly stops by taking the device away. The incident causes a commotion, and Tandy retrieves the device, warning Jasper not to repeat the behavior. Later, Tandy continues watching the video himself. The next day, the group discusses Jasper's happiness, speculating that his behavior stems from losing his parents and friends, making him a quiet child. Carol suggests creating a special event for Jasper, combining Christmas, Easter, and Halloween. Everyone agrees, especially Todd, who believes it might help Melissa, whose condition is worsening. Tandy, however, opposes involving Melissa, fearing she might negatively influence Jasper. Todd promises they will become close friends, convincing Tandy to agree. Todd tries to prove Melissa can bond with Jasper by organizing a fun camping trip across from where Jasper plays. Meanwhile, Erica, Carol, and Gale shop for the event. At night, Jasper hears noise from the living room and goes to investigate. He finds Tandy and Carol welcoming him to a grand event created just for him. Jasper, initially confused, enters to find beautifully decorated attractions and everyone celebrating his arrival. In contrast, Todd, who can't attend due to caring for Melissa, dances with his Bluetooth speaker but becomes annoyed by the noise. Frustrated, he disrupts the party by shouting. Tandy, angered by Todd's interruption, challenges him to a fight, which Todd accepts. Outside, their fight begins with Tandy attacking Todd, but Todd quickly overpowers him. Before Todd can strike again, they are interrupted by the sound of police sirens. Everyone rushes to the source and finds Jasper laughing with Melissa. Tandy, who initially thought Melissa would negatively influence Jasper, sees she is the only one who can make him laugh. This warm moment prompts Tandy and Todd to apologize and hug. Suddenly, they all witness a falling star, only to realize it's a human satellite crashing back to Earth, destroying a building upon impact. Jasper speaks for the first time, even loudly responding to Tandy calling him. Hearing Jasper's voice makes Tandy very happy, and he immediately begins teaching Jasper some things and prepares him for an upcoming big event. Once preparations are complete, the big event begins. It turns out that this is the day Todd and Melissa decide to get married. With a modest setup and Carol and Erica as Melissa's bridesmaids, the ceremony goes smoothly without any issues. After their vows, Tandy takes the initiative to provide a symbolic gesture for their wedding. Since doves are extinct, he releases crickets instead, causing everyone to panic and scatter. After the wedding ceremony, they hold a party that night to celebrate Todd and Melissa's marriage. The new couple looks very happy on their wedding day, and everyone else shares in their joy, especially as they finally hear Jasper's voice, revealing more of his personality. During the festivities, Tandy suddenly asks for everyone's attention to say something. Once the room quiets down, Tandy announces that his parents always wanted to see their children help their wives give birth, implying that he wants to be Carol's doctor during childbirth. Out of respect for Tandy, everyone toasts and continues the celebration. After the event, Carol tells Tandy she only wants Gale to be her doctor. It's not that she doesn't trust Tandy or his parents' abilities. She just wants to ensure her and their unborn child's safety. Carol also mentions that she has already discussed this with Gale. Hearing this, Tandy becomes very angry and confronts Gale, who is reading a health magazine. With a menacing look, he warns Gale that he will be the one to deliver his child. Gale calmly responds that it is ultimately Carol's decision. Determined to prove himself, Tandy declares he will show everyone he is capable of being the doctor. He then retreats, still glaring at Gale. Tandy gathers everyone, even interrupting Todd and Melissa's first night together, and explains that he will demonstrate his baby-catching skills. With Carol's help, Tandy practices catching baby dolls launched from a machine. Although he catches a few dolls, it's not enough to convince everyone he is qualified to assist in childbirth. Not giving up, Tandy then demonstrates a delivery process using gelatin. He extracts a baby doll from the gelatin, but his method disturbs everyone. Unable to win their confidence, Tandy finally gives up and agrees to let Gale handle Carol's delivery. Feeling sorry for Tandy, Gale explains that she can't do it alone and suggests that Tandy could be her co-pilot. This renews Tandy's hope, and he happily accepts the role. Gale then mentions that Todd might also be chosen, but he would need a flight attendant, a role that would suit Tandy. Eager to be involved, Tandy accepts this position as well. While they are talking, Erica suddenly approaches them, looking panicked, and announces that her amniotic fluid has broken. After learning that Erica is about to give birth, Gale immediately initiates the first procedures. She calls Todd and prepares the room to ensure Erica can deliver in comfort. Drawing on her knowledge from the books she has read, Gale calms Erica, reassuring her that everything will be fine. Seeing Erica in pain and distress, Carol, who will soon go through the same phase, becomes very frightened and decides to retreat to her room. Meanwhile, Tandy, acting as the flight attendant, helps prepare the equipment that Todd and Gale will use. To make Erica more comfortable, Todd suggests playing some music. However, Tandy's choice of a death-themed song makes Erica uncomfortable, prompting her to ask him to stop. Melissa and Jasper visit Carol to comfort her, knowing that she is currently overwhelmed with fear, especially as she can hear Erica's continuous screams of pain. To mask Erica's screams, Carol plays a CD of laughing sounds. Melissa tries to reassure Carol by telling her that everything will be all right and that Erica and her baby will be healthy with Gale's help. They then decide to leave for a while, asking Carol to stay put. Back in Erica's delivery room, the situation becomes tense as Erica continues to moan in pain, unable to bear the intensity of childbirth. Gale tries to encourage Erica and keep her calm, assuring her that she can get through this. However, at one point, Erica loses consciousness. Seeing Erica pass out, Gale and Todd start to panic. Todd searches for a way to revive Erica, while Carol, watching Erica unconscious, becomes even more terrified of giving birth. Shortly after, Erica regains consciousness, and everyone encourages her. As Erica focuses on her breathing, Todd and Gale discuss the methods they will use to assist with the delivery. The scene then shifts to Tandy, who chooses to accompany Jasper to the playground. While playing on a slide, Jasper expresses sadness, thinking Erica might die. Tandy explains to Jasper that Erica is not dying but performing a noble task to help maintain the human population, and that he will soon have a baby sister. Understanding this, Jasper feels better, and they continue to enjoy the slide. As they climb the slide's ladder, Tandy and Jasper notice smoke billowing from a factory. Meanwhile, Erica, aided by Gale, Todd, Melissa, and Carol, who has overcome her fears to assist with Erica's delivery, continues to struggle through childbirth. After a significant effort, Gale successfully delivers Erica's baby, a beautiful and healthy girl. Erica immediately embraces her newborn, and everyone is overjoyed, especially Todd, who feels deeply moved by being able to help with the delivery. In the midst of the celebrations, Tandy and Jasper decide to investigate the source of the smoke, which turns out to be coming from a nuclear plant. After realizing that the smoke was coming from a nuclear facility, Tandy and Jasper immediately rush to inform everyone. Ignoring the joyful atmosphere celebrating Erica's baby's arrival, Tandy announced there was something more critical to worry about. He urged everyone to see the smoke for themselves. When they did, Gale tried to verify Tandy's assertion that it originated from a nuclear facility. Tandy swore he was certain about the source of the smoke. Given the seriousness of Tandy's claim, they quickly held a meeting to discuss relocating to a safer place to protect Erica's newborn and Carol's unborn baby. They decided to head to Mexico, the nearest safe destination. They gathered all their belongings, including the house where Carol was sleeping, and set off to distance themselves from the nuclear smoke. The journey progressed swiftly, and they were just 72 miles from their destination. Everyone appeared happy, especially Todd and Melissa, since Mexico was a setting in their favorite film, The Shawshank Redemption. However, as they approached their destination, their safety detector indicated they were heading into danger. Unwilling to take risks, they turned back and discussed alternative shelter options. After a lengthy debate among Gale, Tandy, Todd, and Erica, they decided to return to Los Angeles. Some worried about the possibility of Pat finding them, but Tandy reassured them that Los Angeles was vast, making it unlikely for Pat to locate them. The bus driver then headed toward Los Angeles. The journey to Los Angeles was smooth until disaster struck. Their mobile home caught fire without anyone noticing. The danger multiplied when Pat, who was still alive, tracked the Tucson family's route thanks to the smoke from their burning mobile home. Upon arriving in Los Angeles, they were shocked to find their mobile home completely destroyed. With no place to stay, they decided to board a yacht to find another location. As they boarded, everyone urged Tandy to depart immediately. However, Tandy delayed their departure to ensure the journey would be safe. Meanwhile, Pat's movements remained undetected but were closing in. Once Tandy confirmed their journey would be safe, he prepared to start the boat. But just as Tandy took the helm, their worst fears materialized. Pat suddenly appeared from behind, armed with a rifle. Pat greeted everyone and began threatening the Tucson family's safety. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, Pat was shot dead by someone from behind. As Pat lay lifeless on the ground, it was revealed that his killer was Pamela, the woman controlling the drone that Melissa had previously damaged. The scene begins with Pamela introducing herself after she has successfully killed Pat. As Pat lies on the ground, Pamela introduces one of her good friends, Rear Admiral Roy Billups. However, just as Roy is about to introduce himself, he is suddenly shot from an unexpected direction. It turns out Pat is still clinging to life. After shooting Roy, Pamela quickly finishes off Pat, ensuring he is truly dead. Since Roy has been shot and killed, both he and Pat are given the same burial treatment. However, the difference lies in their burial processes. Roy is simply submerged in the sea, while Pat's head is first decapitated by Tandy and disposed of using a jet ski. Although Pat's body and head are separated, the jet ski ends up moving in the opposite direction, causing Pat's head and body to reunite. That night, Pamela begins to recount how she first met Pat. When she went to Malibu after discovering the whereabouts of the Tucson family, Pamela actually met Pat in Los Angeles. While they were together, Pat noticed smoke, which he believed was coming from the Tucson family. Pat followed the smoke and was surprised to find the family again. However, Pamela, considering Pat to be a bad person, reluctantly shot him. Pamela also shows the jeans that Pat painted for her. As everyone prepares to rest, they suddenly experience a jolt due to a problem with the boat. Since no one knows the boat better than Melissa and Gail, the two of them try to solve the issue, which Gail suspects is caused by the anchor. She presses the anchor button, but it jams. The next morning, they find themselves lost at sea, with no land in sight. Another problem arises, and Gail and Melissa must discuss what to do to find land again. While they are in a state of confusion, Tandy suddenly comes in and complains that he and Todd have broken the toilet. Tandy then shows them the extent of the damage. However, the broken toilet is thrown overboard by Pamela's dog. Instead of fixing the toilet, Tandy meets Pamela and tries to cheer her up. Pamela seems very entertained by Tandy's jokes. While Tandy and Pamela are laughing together, Carol suddenly arrives and inquires about the situation. Tandy truthfully explains that he is just making Pamela laugh, which makes Carol jealous. Carol quickly runs to Melissa and Gail, warning them about Pamela's bad side. However, the situation worsens when Pamela eavesdrops on their conversation. The scene shifts to an announcement by Melissa and Gail, who have two pieces of news. Gail shares the good news. They have spotted land and will likely reach it soon. Melissa shares the bad news. They are not arriving in Zihuatanejo but at an unknown island. With no other options, they agree to approach the uninhabited island. As everyone decides to use a lifeboat to reach the island, Pamela suddenly comes up with a bad idea. After everyone, except Tandy, gets into the lifeboat, she hits Tandy until he passes out and pushes the lifeboat containing the Tucson family away from the ship. Now, the Tucson family must struggle to row their lifeboat to the isolated island. Meanwhile, on the island, someone is watching their movements closely. When Tandy wakes up, he finds himself tied up and shouts at Pamela to release him. However, Pamela ignores his cries. Meanwhile, the rest of the Tucson family has arrived on the deserted island. To ensure the island is safe, Todd, as the only adult male there, ventures out to explore the surroundings. As he approaches some bushes, A hand reaches out from within and beckons Todd to enter. Todd steps into the bushes and soon a man emerges, running towards the women and grabbing their faces one by one. This startles the women, but Todd quickly explains that the man, named Glenn, has been living on the island for 5 years. Glenn was merely checking their faces to confirm they were real humans. Glenn apologizes for his actions and introduces his home, which is nothing more than a pile of leaves he has assembled for shelter. He even reveals that the ground Todd is standing on serves as his toilet. Grateful for the company, Glenn thanks everyone for saving him and asks when their boat will return. This question leaves everyone bewildered. Back on the boat, Pamela begins to interrogate Tandy. She explains that she felt compelled to do what she did to avoid being abandoned alone. However, Tandy, now enraged, curses Pamela for separating him from his wife and unborn child. Pamela remains indifferent and leaves Tandy tied up. As Pamela departs, Tandy looks around for anything he can use to cut the rope binding him. While thinking of Carol, he spots a nail clipper and recalls his own sharp toenails. The scene then shows Tandy freeing himself from the rope. He quickly formulates a plan to turn the tables. Noticing Pamela's pistol is out of her reach, Tandy distracts her successfully. Pamela chases after Tandy, who grabs Pamela's dog and threatens to throw it into the sea. Pamela remains unfazed since her dog is an excellent swimmer, and Tandy would be at risk if she shot him. Seeing his initial threat fail, Tandy makes a more extreme threat. He promises to eat Pamela's dog alive, claiming he loves dog meat. This unusual threat finally compels Pamela to toss her pistol, allowing Tandy to take control. He swiftly turns the boat around to search for the island where the Tucson family is stranded. That night, as Tandy continues his search, he spots a light in the distance. He immediately believes it's a signal from Carol. His hunch proves correct, as Carol is lighting a signal fire that Glenn has helped her build. Shouting her husband's name, Carol never loses hope of seeing Tandy again. The next morning, Carol loses hope and lies down, but to her surprise, Tandy arrives on the island and embraces her. Everyone rushes to greet him, grateful that Tandy has found them. Tandy meets Glenn and quickly suggests they all return to the boat and continue their journey to Mexico. Before departing, they discuss Pamela's fate. Some agree to leave her stranded on the island, but Carol, feeling compassionate, opts to bring Pamela along. In the end, as everyone settles comfortably on the boat, Pamela is seen being towed behind in a lifeboat. When the boat set sail again, Glenn took over the helm, claiming he could navigate the vessel. The group asked how long it would take to reach Mexico. Glenn replied that it would take at least a week, provided they continued to ignore Pamela, who was adrift in the lifeboat. Everyone began to realize that Glenn was starting to sympathize with Pamela. Before any agreement was made, Gail suddenly requested to return to the deserted island, as she had forgotten her sunglasses. Everyone vehemently refused, but they couldn't argue when Gail insisted Todd look for something she couldn't leave behind. It turned out that Jasper had been left behind. Reluctantly, they returned to the island, retrieved Gail's sunglasses, and brought Jasper back. After resolving these issues, they decided to bring Pamela back on board. Grateful, Pamela thanked everyone, especially Carol, promising to occupy the lowest social rank if she was allowed to stay on the boat. True to her word, while everyone was enjoying dinner, Pamela offered various services to make everyone comfortable, but no one accepted her offers. Feeling sorry for her, Glenn brought Pamela a portion of food. Pamela asked Glenn if he wanted her to feed him, but Glenn clarified that the food was for her. This gesture improved their relationship, and they eventually decided to start a relationship. The next day, the long-awaited moment arrived. They spotted Mexico, specifically the region of Zihuatanejo. However, a horrifying sight awaited them. From a distance, they saw dozens of bodies washed up on the beach. When they arrived, Glenn inspected the bodies and, to his shock, found his own child among them. This revelation caused Glenn to change his attitude towards Pamela, becoming cold and dismissive. Meanwhile, Carol surprised Tandy with a room she had chosen for giving birth, but Tandy was horrified when he saw fresh bloodstains on the hospital blankets Carol had taken. As they discussed this, Carol noticed Pamela crying alone. That evening, during dinner, Melissa and Todd were particularly happy to finally be in the place where their favorite movie was filmed. Suddenly, Pamela announced that she would join them for dinner. Puzzled, Glenn asked who had invited her. Carol then stepped in, saying she had invited Pamela. After hearing Carol's explanation, Glenn abruptly left the room, but Pamela stopped him and questioned their relationship. Glenn explained that their relationship was over. He admitted he loved Pamela but couldn't stay with her because the next day, he needed to leave to bury his child properly. Understanding Glenn's sudden change, Pamela realized why he had been acting differently. The next morning, Glenn packed his belongings into his car, saying goodbye and thanking everyone for rescuing him. Just before he left, Pamela shouted and rushed to him, declaring she would go with him, regardless of the consequences. She refused to let Glenn be alone again. They left together to return to Glenn's home. Before departing, Pamela thanked everyone for forgiving her mistakes and gave Carol a bottle of a chemical that could regrow Tandy's lost eyebrows. Then they drove away. The scene begins with Carol inaugurating an abandoned hospital to become their new home. Carol has decorated the hospital to make it feel like a cozy residence. However, just as Carol finishes the inauguration, she faces rejection from Gail and Todd, who decide to choose their own living spaces. Gail decides to stay with Erica, while Todd chooses to stay with Melissa. They leave, which saddens Carol because her chosen home is not appreciated. Tandy tries to comfort her. The scene shifts to Tandy and Jasper, who decide to play with a magnet. Tandy brings some items for Jasper to pull with the magnet and instructs Jasper to press the on button on the truck. Soon, the items Tandy brought are attracted to the magnet. Finding it insufficiently challenging, Tandy brings his armor and uses it for an experiment, asking Jasper to activate the magnet again. When Jasper presses the on button, Tandy is suddenly lifted off the ground. He asks Jasper to press the off button so he can come down. Jasper complies, dropping Tandy harshly. However, when Jasper gets bored, he reactivates the magnet, leaving Tandy stuck above, and then walks away. With no one to help him, Tandy yells when he hears Gail's voice. Sure enough, Gail appears, enjoying her drink, and she agrees to help Tandy. With little knowledge, Gail lowers Tandy, causing him to crash down hard. That night, Tandy consoles a distraught and angry Carol, who is upset that Gail decided to move out. Carol recalls when Gail wore a scarf she made, signaling loyalty to Carol. Feeling betrayed, Carol is deeply hurt. To alleviate the situation, Tandy suggests visiting Gail at her home. They quickly knock on Gail's door and are welcomed in. Carol brings a small gift for her foster mother. After receiving Carol's gift, Gail invites them inside. However, Carol's heart breaks when she sees everyone having dinner without her and Tandy. She asks why they weren't invited, and everyone gives their reasons, which Carol doesn't understand. She decides to leave Gail's house, followed by a disappointed Tandy. The next day, Gail receives a letter from Carol describing herself as an abandoned child. Gail shares this with Erica, who advises her to apologize to Carol. Initially reluctant, Gail feels Erica is taking Carol's side. However, Erica explains she understands the emotions of a pregnant woman. Convinced by Erica's explanation, Gail agrees to visit Carol and apologize. Just as Gail is about to leave for Carol's place, she receives a distress call from Carol through a walkie-talkie. Carol is panicking, feeling she is about to give birth. Gail rushes to help Carol, urging her to stay calm. Upon arriving, Gail is greeted by the sight of Carol cradling her baby. Gail congratulates Carol and asks to see the baby. When Carol lifts the cloth, it reveals Tandy disguised as a baby, yelling at everyone for being late. This frightens Tandy. Soon, the others arrive, congratulating Carol and asking about the baby. To their shock, they see an adult baby with a beard wearing a diaper. Tandy explains why they were late when they needed help, but everyone is angry, finding Carol's prank unfunny. They decide to leave. As they walk away, Gail has an idea to turn the tables. She pretends to fall and calls for help through the walkie-talkie, joined by Erica, who claims she was bitten by a snake. Hearing this, Carol and Tandy panic and try to help. When they hear Melissa and Todd doing the same, Carol and Tandy realize it's a joke and turn off the walkie-talkie. While Gail, Erica, Melissa, and Todd continue laughing at their prank, Todd signals Melissa with the code, Wisconsin. Melissa recognizes it as a danger sign and rushes to Todd, finding him unconscious at the supermarket. She quickly signals the others, explaining it's not a joke. They rush Todd to Carol's place, the only place with medical equipment. They insert a tube to check Todd's heart, hoping to save him. Gail turns on the monitor, and after a tense wait, they see Todd's heartbeat. Soon, Todd wakes up, reassuring everyone that he's okay. The scene begins with an old woman watering her plants. Meanwhile, she observes a group of police officers killing people inside the house. The police manage to enter the house without any obstacles. However, when they reach a particular room, they are suddenly shot one by one from behind. It turns out that the old woman they saw earlier is responsible for the killings. Now, the Tucson family has chosen this haunted house as their new residence. Upon arrival, they quickly select their rooms. The scene then flashes back to 2017, where someone is assembling a bomb intended to be placed inside an object. The next day, this person brings a piñata made from several stacks of paper to celebrate the old woman's birthday, who is their boss. The old woman instructs the person with the piñata to hang it up and gives him a stick to hit it. However, she decides to be the first to strike the piñata herself. Not wanting to arouse suspicion, the person blindfolds himself and nervously swings at the piñata, missing it entirely due to his fear of the bomb exploding. This only makes the boss more suspicious, prompting her to take the stick herself. Just as her subordinate is about to strike the piñata again, gunshots are heard from afar, causing everyone to scatter. The scene shifts back to the Tucson family, showing Todd in a wheelchair because Melissa is worried he might have another heart attack. Todd wears a hat, and people laugh at him. However, Todd looks very uncomfortable with what Melissa is making him do. Next, the scene moves to Jasper, who finds the piñata from 2017, still intact and untouched. Jasper hooks the piñata and grabs a stick to hit it. However, instead of hitting it, he just circles around the piñata, pretending to shoot at it. Meanwhile, Erica and Gail decide to take Erica's daughter, Dawn, for a drive because Gail is tired of hearing Dawn cry constantly. Gail drives her car at full speed, which scares Erica, who asks her to slow down. But when Gail looks back, she notices that Dawn has stopped crying, prompting her to drive even faster. On the other side, Todd, who is dancing to some music, suddenly stops when Melissa turns off the music. This frustrates Todd, and he expresses his annoyance with Melissa's constant nagging, insisting that he is fine. Melissa responds that she is very worried about Todd's health and doesn't want to lose him. The scene flashes back to 2017. Amidst the gunfire, the old woman enters her room, followed by her subordinates, including the bomb maker. She explains that she knows how her enemies are trying to bring her down, but they have failed. She then points a gun at the bald bomb maker. Suddenly, the old woman is shot dead by the bomb maker's accomplice. The accomplice opens the door to reveal a swarm of police outside. The bomb maker is taken away, revealing that the bomb was not in the piñata but in another object. The scene shows Jasper finally hitting the piñata, and instead of a bomb, candy falls out. The final scene depicts a cube, raising the question, is the bomb inside the cube? The scene begins with Carol sleeping peacefully with her sleep equipment. When she wakes up, she is shocked to find a baby has come out of her without her realizing it. She immediately wakes up Tandy, who is equally astonished. After this unexpected event, they announce the birth to everyone, comparing it to Erica's painful delivery. Carol decides to name the baby Bezequel. After congratulating Carol on the birth of Bezequel, everyone goes back to their own activities. However, Gail decides to check Carol's uterus because she is puzzled by Carol's still large belly after giving birth. Upon examination, Gail discovers that Carol is carrying twins, and the second baby is still inside. Gail advises Carol to deliver the second baby immediately, but Carol refuses, saying the baby will come out when the time is right. Gail continues to pressure Carol, worried about her health, but Carol remains adamant. Gail then informs Tandy, who is caring for Bezequel, about the situation. Tandy, upon hearing the news, rushes to Carol with a look of joy on his face. Despite Carol's reluctance to deliver the baby naturally right away, Gail gives Carol a pill to induce contractions and help the baby come out. That night, Tandy, determined to prevent a repeat of the earlier surprise, promises to stay up and watch over Carol. He declares it to be the most romantic thing he has ever done for her, at least according to Carol. However, in the morning, Carol finds Tandy asleep next to her. Tandy explains that he has hired someone to help him, revealing that Todd is the one watching over Carol. Todd keeps an eye on Carol to be prepared if the baby decides to arrive. The scene then jumps to the evening, where Tandy and Gale are still debating Carol's delivery. Tandy disagrees with Gale's plan to induce labor, but Gale insists on her course of action for Carol's health. Amid their heated argument, Carol, while putting Bezequel to sleep, experiences the sudden birth of her second child, halting the debate. Seeing Carol's second baby born, Tandy and Gale rush to her side. Carol names the second baby Mike, in honor of Tandy's twin brother, even though the baby is a girl. The next day, the house is filled with warmth as the Tucson family now has 3 baby girls. After everyone congratulates Tandy and Carol, Erica asks Todd to take care of Dawn as she and Gale plan to go on a date. Todd, who loves babies, happily takes care of Dawn. Meanwhile, Tandy and Carol peacefully care for their 2 newborns in their chaotic world. The scene begins with Todd happily taking care of Erica's child, Dawn, every day. Whenever Erica is tired, Todd steps in to look after Dawn. However, today, Erica intends to breastfeed Dawn, so Todd reluctantly hands her back to her mother. After Dawn leaves, Melissa's jealousy surfaces. She openly suggests that Todd should play with Carol's twins instead. Todd declines, not wanting to hurt Melissa's feelings, as she has been hesitant about having children. But Melissa reassures him and even encourages Todd to invite Jasper to play. Eager to please Melissa, Todd approaches Jasper, who is engrossed in his game console. Feeling awkward about the direct approach, Todd asks Jasper for help with something. Jasper agrees and leaves his console behind. Todd then takes Jasper to play softball to bond with him. After their game, the scene shifts to Jasper helping Todd wash his back. Jasper, with his innocent demeanor, is happy to assist Todd. The next day, Gale visits Erica to express her feelings. Gale shares that she has experienced pregnancy, childbirth, and marriage but harbors trauma about marriage, making her hesitant to marry again. However, thanks to Erica, Gale has overcome this fear. Gale then kneels and proposes to Erica, who, overwhelmed with emotion, immediately accepts. That afternoon, they hold a simple wedding ceremony led by Tandy. They exchange vows to stay together forever and officially become a family. To celebrate, Tandy has prepared a surprise, but everyone already anticipates what he will do. As the ceremony ends, everyone disperses, and Tandy fires his gun into the air, shattering the glass above him. That evening, everyone is happy, celebrating Gale and Erica's wedding. During the party, Erica approaches Carol, assuring her that she won't replace Gale as Carol's mother. Instead, Erica promises to be Carol's adoptive mother, making Carol happy since she has been jealous of Gale's affection for Dawn over Mike and Bezequel. As the party continues, Tandy decides to sing a song for Gale and Erica. Knowing what to expect, everyone leaves Tandy alone. The scene shifts to Melissa feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the presence of babies in their home. She struggles to focus on her book due to their constant crying and searches for a soundproof room to escape the noise. Once Melissa finds a quiet place, Tandy interrupts her to ask about a box containing his collection of adult magazines. Without shame, Tandy searches for the box himself and leaves after finding it. Meanwhile, Todd catches Jasper about to light a firecracker and stops him, instructing Jasper to dispose of it. Jasper complies, and Todd sends him back to his room. Carol then calls Jasper to watch Mike and Bezequel. Jasper agrees and eats the spaghetti Carol made for him while introducing himself to the twins. As Jasper plays with them, Carol suddenly leaves and encounters Erica, who questions her intentions with Jasper. Carol explains that she is introducing her children to Jasper to foster a bond, hoping Jasper will choose them over other girls, like Dawn. Erica, angered by this, argues that Carol has no right to dictate Jasper's future at his age. However, Carol dismisses Erica's concerns, focusing only on her desire to ensure Dawn doesn't outshine her children. As Carol's behavior escalates, Erica grows increasingly frustrated. She finally confronts Carol, protesting her actions toward Jasper. Carol defends herself, claiming the relationship between Jasper and her children is progressing well and should not be disrupted. She then leaves, prompting Erica to take proactive measures. Erica approaches Jasper, inviting him to play with Dawn. Just as Jasper is about to join Dawn, Carol distracts him with loudspeakers, drawing him back to her and away from Erica. The competition for Jasper's attention intensifies when Todd joins Erica in protesting Carol's actions. The dispute over Jasper's custody escalates, with everyone arguing until Melissa intervenes, loudly declaring that Jasper is a child who shouldn't be treated this way. Jasper, now confused and distressed by the ongoing conflict among the adults, looks on bewildered. After Melissa's revelation, all the parents realize their mistake and decide to find Jasper to apologize. However, when they go to Jasper's room, all they find is an old tube television. All of Jasper's belongings are gone. Tandy and Todd decide to search the neighborhood for Jasper. This episode opens differently from the others. It begins with a man named Carl on a date. Carl's mannerisms and behavior make the woman he's dating uneasy, especially when he frequently compliments her in a way that feels like constant flirting. Feeling uncomfortable, the woman pretends to receive a phone call and excuses herself. The date ends, and Carl returns to his apartment. The shocking revelation comes when he opens his fridge, revealing a human head and hands inside. Carl is a serial killer. Feeling bored in his apartment, he takes his beloved dog for a walk. However, they barely take a few steps before Carl sees police officers searching the area. Panicked, he abandons his dog and rushes back to dispose of all evidence. Carl quickly leaves his apartment, but his car breaks down after a few meters. He stops another car for help, and when the driver offers assistance, Carl attacks him with an axe and steals the car. He drives to another city to resume his killing spree. Upon arriving in the new city, Carl quickly finds another victim. He pretends to be an artist looking for someone to paint. When the person agrees, Carl excuses himself to prepare his acrylic paints, but instead selects a suitable knife to use as a weapon. However, his would-be victim, aware of Carl's intentions, manages to escape. Panicked, Carl hastily packs up and flees. Despite his efforts to evade capture, Carl is eventually caught. Police find a human head in his possession while he sleeps. Carl is imprisoned, but even incarceration doesn't stop his killing urges. Shortly after arriving, he targets another inmate under the pretense of painting them. When the inmate agrees, Carl uses a sharp object to fatally wound them, triggering an alarm and a prison lockdown. Back in his cell, Carl is puzzled by a guard wearing a mask. The guard explains he's protecting himself from a virus. Days turn into weeks, and Carl realizes he's the only surviving inmate as the virus decimates the prison population. Only one guard, Martinez, remains to watch over Carl. With only the two of them left, Martinez allows Carl some liberties, such as playing in the yard. One day, Martinez visits Carl's cell, informing him it's his last day on the job and apologizing for not being able to release him. Carl tries to convince Martinez that he has changed, but Martinez is skeptical. In a final attempt, Carl asks Martinez to come closer for a farewell. When Martinez approaches, Carl stabs him to death. Taking the keys from Martinez, Carl attempts to escape but doesn't know the security code for the prison doors. Years pass, and Carl remains trapped until he hears voices, Todd and Tandy. They hear Carl's calls and break into the prison. Opening his cell, they find Carl, who introduces himself. What will happen now that Carl, the serial killer, has met Todd and Tandy? Has Carl truly changed, or will the Tucson family become his next victims? After meeting Carl, Tandy and Todd immediately brought him to the Tucson family, where Tandy introduced Carl to the women. However, Carl startled the women, prompting Tandy to shoot at him until Carl was incapacitated. This further panicked the women, but it turned out to be a prank suggested by Todd to scare them. After realizing that the gun Tandy used was empty, Carl got up and introduced himself formally. They then had dinner, where Carl shared that he was the last remaining prisoner in the world. He recounted stories about different prisoners, including a fictional story about a serial killer. The next morning, Carl woke up and smelled something he found enticing, which turned out to be the scent of Gail's finger being burned by an iron. This triggered Carl's cannibalistic tendencies, even when Gale asked for permission to get some ice. Carl considered taking a small piece of Gale's finger but decided against it, determined to rid himself of his bad habits. The scene then shifted to Todd, Melissa, and Gale, who were planning to continue searching for Jasper. Melissa opposed the idea, arguing that Jasper might just want some alone time. However, Todd insisted that he couldn't sleep peacefully until Jasper was found. Ignoring Melissa's objections, the three continued their search for Jasper. That night, when the house was quiet, Carl approached a trash can containing a small piece of Gale's finger. Just as he was about to take it, Tandy caught him. Carl claimed he was just taking out the trash and pretended to dispose of it. Tandy, however, remained suspicious. After Carl left, Tandy wrote down his observations and reported Carl's suspicious behavior to everyone. But they didn't believe him, knowing that Carl was a former prisoner who had promised to change. The next morning, Tandy continued his investigation. He approached Carl, who was drinking a cup of tea. Tandy didn't trust him and pretended to wish him well. After Tandy left, Carl took a piece of what appeared to be Gale's finger skin and ate it. Tandy witnessed this and was shocked by what he saw. Following this incident, Tandy became even more suspicious of Carl, while Carl grew fonder of Gale. He approached Gale and pretended to paint her. Meanwhile, Melissa was seen handling a cooler box, which Jasper later took. Tandy eventually shared his concerns with Todd, who agreed to investigate Carl further. The scene then shifted to Carl painting Gale. Carl was very pleased when Gale agreed to be painted by him. However, he had prepared several knives to kill Gale. As Carl looked at the knives, he suddenly became uncontrollable and decided to step outside. While Carl was out, Gale saw the painting, and not long after, Tandy and Todd urged Gale to leave. Carl drove off to calm himself, heading towards a cemetery. Tandy and Todd followed him to the cemetery, where they saw Carl digging up a grave and eating one of the corpse's fingers. This sight shocked them both, causing them to vomit. After witnessing Carl's horrific actions, Tandy and Todd quickly leave the graveyard, aware that Carl might have sensed someone was following him. Upon arriving home, Tandy and Todd immediately inform everyone of the shocking scene they witnessed. Todd, with a shaky voice, explains that they saw Carl digging up a grave and eating parts of the corpse. The revelation sends waves of fear through the group. Suddenly, they hear footsteps approaching. Everyone grabs their weapons, ready to defend themselves. It turns out to be Carl, who calmly admits to his cannibalistic tendencies. He expresses his willingness to be punished to protect everyone else. The group decides to restrain Carl, limiting his movements but treating him with a semblance of humanity. Carl explains that he genuinely wants to be a normal person but is unable to shake off his cannibalistic urges. The group convenes to decide Carl's fate, torn between leaving him or killing him. Unable to bring themselves to kill Carl, they agree to return him to prison. The next day, Tandy and Todd escort Carl back to prison. Carl seems to accept his fate. Meanwhile, Melissa discovers Jasper's hiding place, where he had retreated to be alone. After a brief conversation, Melissa leaves Jasper, while Todd continues his search. As Todd passes by the prison where they had just left Carl, he is startled to find the gate open. He returns home to announce Carl's escape. Suddenly, they hear the piano playing inside their house. Fearing Carl's return, they arm themselves and approach the piano. Sure enough, it is Carl. He calmly greets them, explaining how easy it was to break out of prison. To prevent him from harming anyone, they decide to lock Carl in a room. The group holds another meeting, this time seriously considering killing Carl. Tandy prepares straws for everyone to draw, with the person who draws their own name tasked with killing Carl. Carol draws her own name and, overwhelmed, steps away to cry, unable to face the task. Tandy, having anticipated this, volunteers to take Carol's place. The moment of Carl's execution arrives. Tandy leads Carl to a prepared coffin. Carl, realizing his fate, requests permission to solve a Rubik's Cube to distract himself. Tandy agrees, and as Carl enters the coffin, Tandy steps back 10 paces. Unbeknownst to Tandy, Carl quickly solves the Rubik's Cube, triggering a hidden bomb inside. The bomb explodes, killing Carl instantly. After witnessing Carl's gruesome death, Tandy returns to inform everyone waiting for the execution. He explains that Carl died before he could fire the weapon. As Tandy turns around, blood and fragments of Carl's organs are visible on his back due to the bomb explosion. Seeing Tandy covered in blood makes everyone nauseous and reluctant to approach him. Despite this, Tandy insists on cleaning up Carl's remains. After the cleanup, they give Carl a proper burial, accompanied by Todd's accordion music and singing. The atmosphere at the funeral is somber, with everyone sharing their memories and farewells for Carl. Once the funeral concludes, everyone returns to their routines. Todd, meanwhile, has prepared a lying chair for Melissa, angry about her deception regarding Jasper's whereabouts. Their argument escalates, with Todd refusing to share a bed with Melissa if she continues lying. Melissa, on her part, insists she was protecting Jasper and asks Todd to give her space. The next day, Gail, Carol, and Erica see Tandy cleaning up the last traces of Carl's blood. Gail is impressed by Tandy's diligence, and Tandy, encouraged by the praise, continues to appear hardworking. As Todd and Melissa's argument becomes known to everyone, it's revealed that Melissa knows where Jasper is. Melissa no longer hides her visits to Jasper, openly discussing it with Gail and Tandy over wine. During one such visit, Todd secretly follows Melissa, hiding in the back of her car. He spies on her interactions with Jasper and hears Melissa promise not to reveal Jasper's exact location. She also shares how Todd's relentless search for Jasper has touched her. After her visit, Melissa finds Todd waiting in the car. Todd admits he isn't angry about her actions. He just wanted to know Jasper's condition. With that understanding, they decide to leave Jasper in peace and head home. With their issues resolved, happiness follows when Melissa tells Todd she's ready to have a child with him. However, she stipulates that she doesn't want to carry the pregnancy herself, meaning Todd must find another woman willing to be the mother. Todd and Melissa discussed having a child and then attempted to talk to Erica about it. Todd was too nervous to broach the subject, so Melissa explained their desire to have a child with Erica's help. Erica was surprised and asked for some time to think about Todd's request. Meanwhile, Tandy and Carol also began to desire another child, even though Carol had just given birth to twins. Erica, after considering Todd's request, talked to Gail about it. Gail suggested that Todd might not be serious. Later, during a dinner party, Todd anxiously awaited Erica's decision. Feeling pressured, Erica asked Todd and Melissa to speak privately. After their discussion, Todd's face fell in disappointment, and he ended up crying. The next day, Todd became increasingly despondent and uninterested in life, despite Melissa's efforts to cheer him up with a toy train set. He spent his time silently playing with the train, filling an entire room with tracks. While Todd mourned not having a child, Tandy and Carol were dealing with Carol's unexpected pregnancy. Seeing Todd's sadness, Tandy decided to offer his third child to Todd. However, Todd refused, wanting to have a child of his own. When Tandy told Todd about Carol's new pregnancy, Todd became even more upset, destroying his train set in a fit of rage. As Tandy played a ball game in the living room, he noticed the absence of Todd's train set. Todd and Melissa then entered, appearing in better spirits. Todd apologized to everyone for his behavior. Unexpectedly, Erica approached Todd and said she now wanted to have a child with him. Todd was initially hesitant, worried Erica was doing it just for him, but Erica assured him it was her genuine desire. With Erica agreeing to have a child with Todd, the group rallied to support them. Tandy and Carol even created a special space for Todd to focus on the process. Todd expressed his gratitude as he entered the room while Carol stood guard outside. Meanwhile, Melissa thanked Erica for agreeing to help, and Erica reassured her it was her own choice. Todd completed his part in the process, and Gail, acting as the intermediary, took his sample to Erica. They all waited anxiously for the results. During this time, a mysterious truck appeared, heading towards Zihuatanejo, unrelated to the Tucson family. 2 months later, with no word from Erica about the pregnancy, Todd grew impatient and searched her room for a pregnancy test, which angered Erica. Tandy intervened, apologizing to Erica and calming Todd down. Meanwhile, Gail found Carol installing an alarm system to prevent intrusions like the one Carl had caused. The episode's final scene shows the mysterious truck arriving at Jasper's campfire. Tandy's alarm system goes off, signaling someone entering their home. Tandy checks but finds nothing and goes back to sleep. The next morning, he follows his routine but notices his hair has been cut in a prank similar to one by his brother, Mike. Tandy confronts what he thinks is Mike hiding behind a curtain, only to find empty shoes. A message makes Tandy believe Mike is responsible, leading him to another clue. A microphone set up for karaoke. Mike suddenly appears, and the brothers embrace in a joyous reunion. Mike and Tandy prank the group, pretending to reveal Jasper but surprising everyone with Mike's presence. Gail, startled, fires her gun, but Mike reveals it was all a joke. They celebrate Mike's return with a feast, and Mike shares stories of his adventures, including meeting people with advanced technology. Despite initial fear, the group relaxes when Mike says it was all a joke. Tandy and Carol introduce their children to Mike, making him happy to meet his namesake nephew. Mike congratulates Erica on her relationship with Gail. Todd, feeling jealous, reassures Mike about his plans with Erica. Mike leaves them to talk privately, and Todd apologizes to Erica for pressuring her. Mike takes Tandy to his truck to show off his gadgets, including a body temperature detector. Todd, Melissa, and Gail discuss Todd's suspicions about Erica sabotaging the pregnancy by drinking soda. Despite Todd's frustration, the group urges him to be patient. Later, Mike finds insulting graffiti and confronts Todd, who denies involvement. That night, Todd apologizes to Erica, who then announces she is pregnant. Overjoyed, Todd celebrates the news with everyone, and they throw a party for the upcoming baby. After the party, Mike monitors his temperature detector and gets a signal indicating a human presence. The scene opens with Mike, who is in disbelief over what his thermal device has just detected. The scene then shifts to everyone having breakfast prepared by Carol, but it's clear they aren't enjoying the meal. As they try to eat, Mike arrives late and apologizes for missing breakfast. He explains that his thermal device detected a significant heat source, which he suspects might be a volcano since it's too intense to be human. Mike plans to investigate the source the next day. Hearing this, Tandy becomes upset with Mike, who has only just returned after a long absence. Tandy tries to persuade Mike to stay by reminding him how difficult it is to take care of 3 children without his help. After several pleas, Mike reluctantly decides to postpone his trip. Meanwhile, the women go searching for stores to replenish their food supplies, and Melissa hones her shooting skills with Gail's help. That night, Mike secretly attempts to leave, but Tandy catches him and blocks the truck's path with his head. Mike threatens to run over Tandy's head with the truck, but Tandy calls his bluff. After a long argument, Mike gives up on leaving. The next morning, Mike catches Tandy hiding his truck keys, but Tandy pretends he's just cleaning the fireplace. Not wanting to escalate the situation, Mike nods and walks away. Feeling bored, Tandy later finds Mike playing with a large ball and joins in. They spend the day playing together, enjoying each other's company, and singing favorite songs into the night. At midnight, Tandy proudly shows off his adorable twin babies to Mike, marveling at their cuteness. Afterward, Mike heads to bed, but Tandy soon finds him retrieving the hidden truck keys. A heated argument ensues, with Mike insisting on leaving. Mike admits he's jealous of Tandy's life, including his wife and children. This revelation causes Tandy to reflect. The next day, as Mike prepares to leave, Tandy shows up to bid him farewell. Suddenly, Tandy pulls out a bag and insists on coming along as a condition for Mike's departure. Tandy quickly says goodbye to Carol and the kids, and they set off to investigate the thermal reading. The scene shifts to Todd, who is repainting a room for Erica. While painting, Todd accidentally makes a hole in the wall. Curiosity gets the better of him, and he continues to dig until he discovers a hidden corpse. After discovering the corpse, Erica suddenly returns, and Todd quickly covers the hole, telling Erica to leave. Erica immediately smells a foul odor, giving Todd a perfect excuse to send her away. Unable to bear the smell, Erica leaves, and Todd resumes his search. After digging deeper, Todd finds a secret room and continues breaking through the wall. The scene shifts to Tandy and Mike on their journey. They come across an avocado and orange orchard. Feeling hungry, Tandy decides to stop and pick some fruit. As they do, they find a herd of goats gathered in one spot. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, Tandy plans to bring all the goats back to show everyone. Mike, however, insists they continue their journey to the source of the heat. They compromise by selecting one male and one female goat to breed later and continue their trip. Back to Todd, who, after finding the secret room, calls everyone to see his discovery. Inside, they find several mummified corpses. They further explore the area, which frightens everyone when they find weapons, marijuana, and active grenades. The scene shifts again to Tandy and Mike, who finally arrive at the source of the heat. Mike finds nothing, making the trip seem pointless. Tandy suggests returning home, but Mike asks for some time alone to reflect. Meanwhile, in Tucson, Melissa and the others test if the grenades are functional. Melissa pulls the pin on a grenade and throws it. After a few seconds, it explodes, prompting them to gather all the evidence, including marijuana and firearms. As they do, Carol starts playing the piano, heightening everyone's caution. Gail stops Carol, asking if the piano has been checked. Everyone shakes their heads, indicating it hasn't. Gail inspects the piano and finds an explosive inside. They use Tandy's robotic dog to trigger the bomb, successfully blowing up the piano and the explosive. Back with Tandy and Mike, after a long wait, they decide to return to the Tucson residence. Upon arrival, Mike's thermal device suddenly activates, and the area where Mike had been sitting starts rumbling. A door appears, and numerous people wearing protective masks emerge from the hidden space. As soon as Tandy and Mike arrive, they are greeted by everyone, who has packed their personal belongings. Tandy and Mike are puzzled about why everyone is carrying their possessions. Gail explains that the house has been declared unsafe due to the discovery of several grenades, corpses, and firearms. Before they leave, Tandy and Mike reveal the miracle they recently found: 2 pairs of goats that can provide them with yogurt, milk, and meat. Following this, a farewell ceremony begins, led by Tandy in a solemn manner, much like a human farewell. After the prayer, Tandy instructs everyone to wear safety glasses and hats. He then presses the bomb button to demolish the house. However, when the bomb explodes, debris from the house hits the 2 goats that were running around. Despite this, everyone remains unbothered, and Tandy and Mike search for another vehicle to accommodate everyone. After a long search, they find a truck capable of carrying a train carriage. They decide to head to a place called Cancun. Everyone is excited about moving to a new, comfortable place. The journey, led by a cheerful Tandy, begins. Halfway through, Tandy decides to stop where he and Mike found the goats. However, upon arrival, everyone focuses on picking some oranges while Tandy and Mike search for the missing goats. During their search, Mike spots a house, and they decide to investigate. Finding it safe, they choose to stay there for the night. After dinner, everyone goes to rest except Tandy, who can't sleep. He decides to play with his robotic dog, but is puzzled when it doesn't move. Checking the battery, he discovers it is dead. Unable to use it anymore, Tandy buries the robot dog. While digging, he hears a real dog barking and suddenly sees a dog right in front of him. Shocked, Tandy tries to catch the dog, but it runs away quickly. The next morning, after a good rest, finding the goats, and picking some oranges, they prepare to continue their journey. Just as they start driving, they see the dog Tandy encountered the previous night. Seeing the dog again, Tandy reconsiders leaving the place. While others shout, "Cancun," Tandy stops the vehicle, digs up the robot dog's grave, and explains that he'd rather stay here with plenty of fruit, sufficient goats, and a house. He hands the truck keys to Mike, allowing him to continue exploring if he wishes. With no other choice, everyone agrees to Tandy's plan and decides to stay. After Mike leaves and says goodbye, Tandy plans to plant some trees. As everyone gets enthusiastic and starts going outside, Gail and Todd call Tandy to see something important. Curious, Tandy steps outside. His face turns to shock and fear as he sees a large group of people with full protective gear staring at them. This is the end of The Last Man on Earth Season 4 series. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment if you have a movie recommendation for us to discuss. See you soon.